Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Thornfield, and I've been a forest ranger for 17 years. I inspect old mines in the Monongahela National Forest here in West Virginia. It's dangerous work, but someone has to make sure these abandoned holes in the ground don't kill anybody else. My daddy died in a mine explosion back in 1962. I was just 10 years old then. After that, I swore I'd never go underground like him and my granddaddy did. But here I am, spending half my time crawling through dark tunnels, checking for gas leaks and cave-ins. Funny how life works out. October 1978 was unseasonably warm. The leaves should have been falling, but instead, we had this thick fog rolling through the hollows every morning. It made everything feel wrong, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. That's when I got the call about Blackwater Mine #7. "Sam, we got reports of strange lights coming from that old mine," Deputy Rita McLeod told me over the radio. "Folks are saying they hear screaming at night." I laughed. "Rita, that mine's been sealed tight since '58. Ain't nothing in there but bad air and old equipment." "I know what you think, Sam, but the state wants it checked before they pour concrete over the entrance for good." 3 different people called it in this week. I sighed and grabbed my gear. Blackwater #7 was 14 miles up a logging road that barely deserved the name. The mine had exploded 20 years ago, killing 37 men. Their bodies were never recovered. The company just sealed the entrance and walked away. Local folks had stories about that place. They called it cursed, said something evil lived in those tunnels. But I knew better. Mines are dangerous enough without adding ghost stories to the mix. The drive took me 2 hours, winding through thick forest that seemed to press closer to the road with each mile. My CB radio crackled with static, then went dead silent. These mountains played hell with radio signals. When I finally reached the mine, I knew something was wrong. The October morning was cool, maybe 50 degrees. But standing near the mine entrance, I was sweating. My thermometer read 78 degrees, and it was climbing. The sealed entrance looked wrong, too. Someone had been digging at the concrete and steel barrier. Fresh tool marks scored the metal, and loose dirt was piled nearby. Who would want to break into an abandoned mine? I walked closer and caught a smell that made my stomach turn. Sulfur. Like rotten eggs, but stronger. The air shimmered with heat waves, like you see rising off summer pavement. This wasn't right. This wasn't natural. I checked my equipment twice. Gas detector, oxygen meter, portable radio, emergency beacon. Everything was working fine, but my hands were shaking a little as I strapped on my headlamp. Just gas buildup, I told myself. Mines do weird things when they sit sealed for 20 years. But as I approached the damaged barrier, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Scratching, coming from inside the mine, like fingernails dragging across stone. I should have turned around right then. Should have called for backup, or better yet, told the state to just pour their concrete and forget about it. But I had a job to do, and I'd never walked away from a mine inspection in my life. The concrete barrier had a gap near the bottom, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Someone had chipped away at it for hours, maybe days. The edges were still sharp, and there were dark stains on the broken concrete that I didn't want to think about too hard. I clicked on my headlamp and squeezed through the opening. The tunnel beyond was hot as a furnace. My breath came out in puffs, even though I was sweating through my shirt. The walls were black with old coal dust, and my light beam seemed to get swallowed up after about 10 feet. I pulled out an old miner's journal I'd found in the forestry office. It belonged to a man named Ezra Blackwater, one of the few survivors from the 1958 explosion. His handwriting was shaky, but I could make out most of it. Asterisk, ain't natural, what we found in Tunnel 7. Red eyes watching us from the coal face. Henderson swears he saw something moving in the shadows. Company says, keep digging, but I'm telling you, we need to get out of here. Something's wrong with this mountain. Asterisk. I flipped through more pages. The entries got stranger as they went on. Asterisk, lost 3 more men yesterday. Company says it was another gas pocket. But there weren't no explosion. Found their hard hats, but the men, they just vanished. And the coal's hot to the touch now, like it's burning from the inside. Asterisk. The last entry was dated the day before the disaster. Asterisk. It spoke to me today, called my name from deep in the mine, voice like grinding stone. I'm getting my boys out of here tonight, don't care what the company says. Some things ain't worth the money. Asterisk. But Ezra never got his boys out. The mine exploded the next morning. I followed the main tunnel deeper into the mountain. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was bouncing off surfaces that weren't there. The temperature kept climbing, 80 degrees, 85. My gas detector was going crazy, beeping warnings about methane levels. That's when I saw the footprints. Fresh boot prints in the coal dust, leading deeper into the mine. But here's what made my skin crawl. The prints were glowing. Just faintly, like they were lit from underneath. And they were still warm. I knelt down and held my hand over one of the prints. The heat coming off it could have cooked an egg. "Hello?" I called out. "Forest Service. If someone's in here, you need to come out. This area is unsafe." My voice echoed down the tunnel and died away. Then, from somewhere deep in the mountain, I heard an answer. "Help us." The voice was so faint I almost missed it. But it was definitely human. Someone was trapped down there. I grabbed my radio, but got nothing but static. The emergency beacon wasn't working either. These mountains were notorious for blocking signals, and being underground made it worse. I had two choices: go back and get help, or follow the voice deeper into the mine. If someone was hurt and trapped, they might not survive the time it would take me to hike out and bring back a rescue team. I followed the glowing footprints. The tunnel sloped downward, branching off into side passages that my light couldn't penetrate. The walls were covered with strange marks, not tool marks from mining, but gouges that looked almost like claw scratches. Some of them went 10 feet up the wall. "Help us, please." The voice was closer now, coming from a side tunnel marked 7 in faded white paint. Tunnel 7, the same one mentioned in Ezra's journal. I turned into the passage and immediately hit a wall of heat that made me gasp. My thermometer read 98 degrees. The air was thick and hard to breathe, full of sulfur and something else. Something that smelled like burning hair. 30 feet into Tunnel 7, I found them. 37 hard hats, arranged in a perfect circle. Inside the circle were bones. Lots of bones, scattered and broken like something had been gnawing on them for years. But the bones weren't 20 years old. Some still had bits of meat clinging to them. And in the center of the circle, carved deep into the coal floor, were words. "Set us free." That's when I heard the laughter. Low and rumbling, like the sound of shifting rock. But there was intelligence in it. Malice. And it was coming from right behind me. I spun around, my headlamp beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing there but tunnel walls and my own panicked breathing. But the laughter continued, seeming to come from the walls themselves. "Who's there?" I shouted. "Show yourself." The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then I saw them, 2 red dots, glowing in the darkness beyond my light. Eyes. Watching me from about 50 feet down the tunnel. They were too high up to be human eyes, maybe 8 feet off the ground, and they were getting closer. I fumbled for my emergency flare, hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. When I struck it and the red light flared up, illuminating the tunnel, I saw something that made my mind want to shut down completely. A shape made of coal and shadow, 12 feet tall and roughly human. Its skin looked like living coal, with veins of fire running through it like molten cracks. When it moved, pieces of burning coal dropped from its body and hissed against the tunnel floor. But the worst part was its face. It had features, a mouth, a nose, eye sockets, but they looked like they'd been carved out of coal by someone who'd never seen a real human face. And those red eyes burned like furnaces. "You came," it said, and its voice was the sound of grinding stone. Finally, someone with coal blood in his veins. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The thing, whatever it was, filled the tunnel from wall to wall. "What are you?" I managed to whisper. "I am hunger," it said. "I am the fire that burns beneath the mountain. Your people fed me well for many years, sending their sons into my darkness. But then they sealed me away, and I have been so very hungry." It gestured to the circle of bones behind me. "These few have kept me alive, but barely. I need more. Many more. And you? You have the bloodline I require. You're talking about the miners, the men who died here. The thing that called itself hunger laughed again. Died? Oh, they did not die quickly. I savored each one. Their fear, their pain, their slow understanding that no God would save them in this place. Delicious. My flare was burning down. In a few minutes, I'd be left in darkness with this thing. But I grew careless, it continued. The explosion was not my doing. Your people tried to bury me, seal me away from fresh meat. They succeeded, for a time. 20 years, I said, trying to keep it talking while I figured out how to get past it. 20 years of feeding on scraps, on the lost and the foolish who wandered too deep. But now I am strong enough to break free. I need only a few more souls. Souls with coal dust in their lungs, darkness in their hearts. Souls like yours, Samuel Thornfield. It knew my name? How did it know my name? Your father was delicious, it said, reading my expression. Franklin Thornfield. He lasted 3 days before he stopped screaming. Rage hit me like a physical blow. You lying piece of... The cave-in that killed your father was no accident. I called him deep into the mountain, just as I'm calling you now. He came willingly, believing he could save his crew. Just as you came willingly, believing you could save whoever was crying for help. My flare flickered and went out. In the darkness, I heard it moving closer. Each step shook the tunnel, and I could feel the heat radiating from its body. Run, it whispered. I do so enjoy a chase. I ran. My headlamp beam bounced wildly as I stumbled back down the tunnel, but I could hear it behind me. Not footsteps, more like the sound of a rock slide, mixed with that grinding laughter. I reached the main tunnel and turned left, heading for what I hoped was the exit, but the tunnel seemed to go on forever. My light showed the same coal-black walls, the same support beams, over and over, like I was running in place. Behind me, that voice echoed through the darkness. You cannot leave, Samuel. This mountain is mine now. These tunnels go where I will them to go. I came to a junction I didn't remember from before. 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. All of them looked identical. From one tunnel came the sound of men singing, an old mining song my father used to hum. But the voices were hollow, echoing, like they were coming from the bottom of a well. From the second tunnel came the sound of machinery, conveyor belts and mining equipment, even though there was no power in this place. The third tunnel was silent, but hot air was flowing out of it, carrying the smell of sulfur and burning coal. The singing was getting louder. I recognized the song now. Dark as a dungeon, an old Carter family tune about the dangers of mining. But as I listened, the words changed. Come all you young miners, and listen to me. I'll tell you a story. Of Samuel, you see. He came to the mountain to set the souls free, but the mountain was hungry. As hungry as he. It was calling to me. Using my father's song, my family's history, to draw me deeper into its trap. But I remembered something else from my father's stories. Something about air currents and emergency exits. I closed my eyes and felt for moving air. There, just a whisper of cooler air coming from the silent tunnel. An air current meant a way out. I headed into the darkness, following the faint breeze and praying it would lead me to the surface. Instead, it led me to hell. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber I hadn't seen on any of the mine maps. My headlamp beam couldn't reach the far walls, but what it did show made my stomach turn. Bodies. Dozens of them, arranged in neat rows like some kind of horrible garden. Some were nothing but bones. Others looked like they'd died yesterday. All of them wore the clothes of different eras. Overalls from the 1,950 seconds, hiking gear from the 1,970 seconds, even what looked like a Civil War uniform. This thing had been feeding here for over a century. At the center of the chamber sat a throne made of coal and twisted metal. Mining equipment, pickaxes, shovels, hard hats, had been melted and fused together into a seat fit for a king. And on that throne sat the coal devil in all its horrible glory. Up close, I could see it more clearly. Its body was constantly shifting, coal falling away and being replaced by new pieces that seemed to grow from within. The fire that ran through its veins pulsed like a heartbeat, and its eyes burned with an intelligence that was old and hungry and utterly inhuman. Welcome to my court, Samuel Thornfield, it said. "Do you see what I have built with the gifts your people have given me?" Around the throne, other figures moved in the shadows. At first I thought they were more of the devil's victims, but then I realized the truth was much worse. They were the miners from 1958. All 37 of them, still wearing their work clothes, still carrying their tools, but their eyes were empty black holes, and their skin was the color of coal dust. "They serve me now," the devil said. "Death is not the end in this place. It is merely the beginning of eternal service." One of the dead miners stepped forward. Even with his face covered in coal dust and his eyes gone dark, I recognized him from an old photograph my father had shown me. "Hello, Sammy," the dead man said in a voice like grinding gravel. "Your daddy said you might come looking for us someday." It was my father, Franklin Thornfield, dead these 16 years, standing before me as one of the devil's slaves. "Dad?" The word came out as a whisper. "Ain't no dad anymore, boy," he said. "Just another soul bound to the mountain, and you're going to join us real soon." The coal devil rose from its throne. Standing at its full height, it was even more terrifying than before. 15 feet tall, maybe more, with arms that ended in claws made of burning coal. "I have been patient," it said. "I have fed on scraps and built my strength slowly, but tonight I will be free. Tonight I will walk the surface world and claim what is rightfully mine." "The whole mountain range?" I asked, backing toward the chamber wall. "The whole world, in time. But first, this mountain, every mine, every hollow, every family that has ever sent a son into the darkness. They will all serve me, as these do." The dead miners began to move, forming a circle around me. Their pickaxes and shovels gleamed in the firelight, and I realized they weren't just for show. These things intended to kill me and add me to their ranks. But I wasn't ready to join my father's ghost army just yet. I remembered something from Ezra Blackwater's journal. Something about Tunnel 7 and the day before the explosion. He'd written about getting his boys out, about not caring what the company said. What if the explosion wasn't an accident? What if it was Ezra's attempt to stop this thing? I looked around the chamber more carefully. The walls were cracked and scorched, like they'd been through a massive explosion, but the cracks formed a pattern, almost like they'd been designed to channel force toward the center of the room. Ezra had tried to blow up the coal devil. He'd failed, but maybe he'd weakened it. Maybe that's why it had taken 20 years for the thing to regain enough strength to start hunting again. I pulled out my last emergency flare and held it high. "You know what I think?" I said, louder than necessary. "I think you're not as strong as you pretend to be. I think that explosion in 1958 hurt you bad, and you're still not fully recovered." The devil's eyes flared brighter. "Fool, I am eternal. I am the fire beneath the earth itself. Then why are you still stuck in this one little mine? Why haven't you broken free already?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across that coal-carved face. "You need the right bloodline," I continued. "That's what you said. Not just any soul will do. You need miners' sons, people with coal dust in their family history, because they're the only ones who can actually set you free." The dead miners had stopped moving. Even my father's ghost was standing still, listening. "But here's the thing," I said, pulling out the small charges I always carried for emergency mine clearing. "I'm Franklin Thornfield's boy. I've got coal dust in my veins going back 4 generations. And I'm telling you to go back to hell where you belong." I threw the flare into a pile of old mining equipment and dove for cover as the devil roared in rage. The explosion that followed wasn't big enough to bring down the chamber, but it was loud enough to be heard for miles. And in this mountain, loud enough to wake things that had been sleeping since 1958. The blast triggered something in the mountain itself. I felt it before I heard it, a deep rumbling that started in my bones and worked its way up through the rock. The coal devil's chamber began to collapse, huge chunks of stone falling from the ceiling like the mountain was trying to crush what lived inside it. The devil itself was screaming, a sound like metal being torn apart. The explosion had scattered pieces of burning coal across the chamber, and each piece that separated from its body seemed to weaken it. "This changes nothing," it roared as rocks crashed down around its throne. "I will find another way. I will." A support beam, weakened by decades of heat and pressure, gave way and crashed across the devil's chest. It didn't kill the thing. I don't think anything could kill it completely, but it pinned it to the ground as the chamber continued to collapse around us. The dead miners were breaking apart too. crumbling like they were made of coal dust and shadows. My father's ghost looked at me one last time, and for just a moment, his eyes weren't black holes anymore. "Get out, Sammy," he whispered, and his voice was the one I remembered from childhood. "Get out and don't come back." Then he was gone, scattered like ash in the wind. I ran for the tunnel as the mountain came down behind me. The way out seemed clearer now, like the devil's power over the mine was breaking along with its body. My headlamp beam showed familiar landmarks, the junction where I'd heard the singing, the spot where I'd found the glowing footprints. The entrance was just ahead when I heard one last thing from the collapsing chamber behind me. Not the devil's voice, but something older. Something that might have been the mountain itself. "Sleep now, dream of darkness, but do not wake again." I squeezed through the gap in the concrete barrier, just as another explosion shook the mountain. This one was bigger, deeper, like something fundamental had just shifted in the earth's bones. When I looked back, the gap was gone. The entrance had collapsed completely, sealing itself with tons of rock and debris. It took me 6 hours to hike back to my truck. My radio started working again when I got within 2 miles of the road, and I called in a report about unstable ground conditions and seismic activity. Nobody questioned it. These old mountains shifted and settled all the time. 3 days later, a state geological team confirmed that the entire area around Blackwater Mine #7 was too unstable for any kind of development. They declared it permanently off-limits and posted warning signs for a quarter-mile radius. I never told anyone what I really found in that mine. Who would believe it? But I requested a transfer to surface duties only, and I've never inspected another underground site since. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear my father's voice on the wind. Not the coal dust ghost version, but the real him. The way he sounded when I was 10 years old. He's warning me about something, but I can never quite make out the words. And sometimes, when the mountain fog rolls through the hollows on October nights, I can smell sulfur in the air. Just faint, like a memory of rotten eggs. The coal devil is contained for now. Maybe permanently, maybe not. But I know one thing for certain. There are other mines in these mountains, other sealed tunnels where things might be sleeping in the darkness, waiting for the right person to come looking. I keep a list of them now. All the mines that had unusual accidents or were sealed suddenly without proper investigation. There are more than you'd think, and I make sure no one goes near them, because some things are meant to stay buried, even if it means leaving their victims unburied too. Some doors should never be opened, no matter who might be crying for help on the other side. But on quiet nights, when the fog rolls in thick and the mountains seem to lean closer together, I wonder if I really stopped anything at all, or if I just bought us some time before something much worse comes crawling up from the deep places beneath the earth. The coal devil called itself hunger. But I think it was just the beginning, because hunger never really dies. It just waits. My name is Catherine Milbrook, and I've been a forest ranger for 13 years. Before that, I taught special education for 8 years. People always ask why I switched from teaching kids to protecting trees, but the truth is, I never really stopped working with children. I just moved my classroom to the Cherokee National Forest. The Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest is where I spend most of my time now. It's a special place, one of the last virgin forests in the eastern United States. Some of these trees are over 400 years old. When you stand next to a tulip poplar that's been growing since before Europeans came to America, it changes how you think about time. I lost most of my hearing in my left ear when I was 7. Childhood illness. Most people think that would make forest work harder, but it actually helps sometimes. When you can't hear perfectly, you learn to notice other things. The way light moves through leaves. How animals act when something's wrong. The feeling in the air before a storm comes. September 1984 was supposed to be a normal month. I had a youth group coming in, 12 kids from Knoxville, ages 10 to 14. We do these programs 3 times a year. City kids come out for a week and learn about nature. They love it. Fresh air, hiking trails, sleeping in cabins. Most of them have never seen stars without streetlights. The group arrived on a Tuesday. Bright, excited faces piling out of a yellow school bus. Their counselor, Mark Stevens, was a young guy, maybe 22, first time bringing a group to our forest. He seemed nervous but eager to do a good job. "Miss Millbrook," he said, shaking my hand. "Thank you for having us. The kids have been talking about this trip for weeks." I smiled. "They'll have plenty to see. This forest is special. These trees were here when Cherokee children played under them 3 centuries ago." The kids explored their cabins and we gathered for orientation around the fire pit. I always start the same way, explaining the rules, the safety procedures, the wildlife they might see. Bears, mostly. A few wildcats. Nothing dangerous if you're careful. "The most important rule," I told them, "is never wander off alone. This forest is bigger than it looks. People have gotten lost here for days." One girl, maybe 12, raised her hand. "Have kids ever gotten lost here?" I paused. There had been stories over the years. A few missing persons reports. But most turned out to be kids who went home early or got picked up by relatives without telling anyone. "Sometimes people get turned around," I said. "That's why we use the buddy system." That first night was perfect. Clear sky, warm fire, kids roasting marshmallows and asking questions about the forest. Mark seemed to relax as the evening went on. Before bed, I walked the perimeter like I always do. Everything seemed normal, but as I passed the edge of camp, I heard something that made me stop. Children laughing, playing some kind of game. The sound came from deep in the forest, maybe a quarter-mile away. I counted the kids around the fire. All 12 were there. Mark was telling ghost stories, so who was laughing in the woods? I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the sound. The laughter got louder, then suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Even the crickets went quiet. When I came back to camp, Mark looked worried. "Everything okay?" "Just thought I heard something," I said. "Probably kids from another campground." But I knew there wasn't another campground for 8 miles. The next morning, Mark was gone. I found his sleeping bag empty at 6 a.m. when I did my morning check. His backpack was still there. His boots were by the door. But Mark was nowhere to be found. The kids were confused and getting scared. Tommy McReynolds, a quiet boy with thick glasses, came up to me while I was organizing a search. "Miss Millbrook," he said softly. "I heard Mark leave last night." "What did you hear, Tommy?" "Kids calling him. From the forest. They were saying his name, asking him to come play." He got up and went outside. I knelt down to Tommy's level. What did these voices sound like? Like kids our age, but old. Does that make sense? It didn't make sense. But I radioed for help anyway. Park headquarters sent 2 more rangers and a search dog. We spent all day looking for Mark. Found some footprints leading into the deep forest, but they just stopped. Like he vanished into thin air. By evening, we had to call off the search until morning. The kids were scared and wanted to go home, but the bus wasn't coming until Friday. I radioed their school to explain the situation. That's when Joseph Blackbear showed up. Joseph was a Cherokee elder who sometimes helped with our cultural education programs. He was in his 60s, with long gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He'd grown up hearing the old stories, the ones most people called legends. "Heard you had some trouble," he said, sitting down by my cabin. I told him about Mark, about the voices Tommy heard, about the footprints that led nowhere. Joseph nodded slowly. "September," he said. "Equinox coming. That's when they're most active." "When? Who's most active?" "The Kitowa. The little pale ones. Your people call them moon-eyed children." I'd heard the stories. Cherokee folklore about small, pale beings who lived in the mountains. Supposedly they couldn't see in daylight and were driven out by ancient Cherokee warriors. Most people thought they were just stories about early white settlers. "Joseph, we're dealing with a real missing person here." He looked at me seriously. "So am I." That night, I made the kids stay inside their cabin. I sat on the porch with my flashlight and radio, watching the tree line. Around midnight, I heard it again. Children playing, laughing, calling out in some kind of game. This time, I could make out words. "Come play with us. Come find us. We've been waiting so long." The voices were definitely children. But Tommy was right. There was something old about them, like kids trying to remember how to be kids. I walked toward the sound again, but slower this time. The laughter led me deeper into the forest than I'd ever gone at night. The trees here were massive, their trunks so wide that 5 people holding hands couldn't reach around them. Moonlight barely reached the ground. Then I saw them. 3 children, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing in a circle around something carved into a fallen log. They had pale skin that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Their hair was white blonde, almost silver. They wore simple clothes, tunics, and leggings that looked handmade. But their eyes were completely white. No pupils, no color, just white. One of them looked up at me and smiled. "Hello, Catherine. We've been waiting for you." I should have run. Every instinct told me to run. But they were just children, small and pale, and somehow sad. "Where is Mark?" I asked. "Mark is playing with us now," said the girl. "He likes the hiding game. Do you want to play?" "I want to see Mark." The three children giggled. "He's hiding very well. It took him all day to learn, but now he's very good at it." They stepped apart, and I could see what they'd been standing around. Carved into the fallen log were dozens of names. Some looked fresh, others were so old they were barely readable. I recognized a few from missing persons reports over the years, including Mark Stevens, carved in letters that looked days old. "How did you?" When I looked up, the children were gone, just moonlight and shadows, and the sound of laughter moving away through the trees. I ran back to camp and radioed for backup, told them we needed a full search team and maybe FBI involvement. Something was very wrong in Joyce Kilmer Forest. But deep down, I knew no search team would find Mark Stevens, not where he'd gone. 2 more rangers arrived the next morning, along with a state police detective. I told them everything except the part about seeing the children. That part sounded crazy, even to me. The detective, a serious woman named Martinez, interviewed all the kids. Tommy's story about voices in the forest matched what 3 other kids reported. They'd all heard children calling and playing after lights out. "Kids have active imaginations," Martinez said, "especially when they're scared." But I could see she was bothered. Missing adults don't just vanish without a trace. By afternoon, we found the log I'd seen the night before. The carved names were still there, clear as day. Martinez took photos and called for a forensics team. "Some of these names go back decades," she said, studying the carvings. "This could be evidence in multiple cold cases." I didn't tell her that Mark's name had appeared overnight. That evening, Joseph Blackbear came back. He brought sage and small carved stones that he placed around our camp. "Protection symbols," he explained. "Won't stop them, but might slow them down." "Stop who?" Martinez asked. Joseph looked at her seriously. "The moon-eyed children. They've been taking people from this forest for 300 years. Usually just 1 or 2 at a time, years apart. But something's changed. They're getting bolder." Martinez was skeptical, but she'd seen the log. She'd seen names going back to the 1800s. Whatever was happening here had a long history. As darkness fell, I made everyone stay in the main cabin together. Kids, rangers, even Martinez. 16 people in one room felt safer than spreading out. Around 10 o'clock, we heard them singing. It was a lullaby, sweet and gentle, coming from just outside the cabin, children's voices harmonizing in perfect tune. The melody was beautiful but somehow wrong, like music played backwards. "Rock-a-bye, baby, in the treetop, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock." Tommy pressed against the window. "There they are," he whispered. I looked out and saw them. Not 3 this time, but a dozen. Children of various ages, all with that pale, glowing skin and white eyes. They stood in a perfect circle around our cabin, singing and swaying together. "When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come, baby, cradle and all." One of the kids in our cabin, a girl named Sarah, started walking toward the door. "Sarah, no!" I grabbed her arm. She looked at me with a dreamy expression. "They want us to come play. They've been alone for so long." 2 more kids started moving toward the door. Then 3. Whatever the moon-eyed children were doing, it was working. "Nobody leaves this cabin," I shouted. "Martinez, help me." But Martinez was staring out the window in shock. "There are children out there, real children. Where did they come from?" The singing got louder. More of our kids started moving toward the door like sleepwalkers. Even some of the adults looked dazed. Joseph started chanting in Cherokee and burning sage. The sweet smoke filled the cabin. Slowly, our kids stopped moving toward the door. Outside, the singing stopped. The moon-eyed children looked angry now. One of them, a boy who appeared maybe 10 years old, stepped up to our window. "Let them come, Catherine," he said. His voice carried clearly through the glass. We just want to play. We've been so lonely. Go away, I said. These children are under my protection. The boy smiled, showing teeth that seemed too sharp. Your protection is temporary. Our games last forever. Then they were gone. All of them. Vanished like smoke. But carved into the dirt where they'd been standing was a message. 3 days until new moon. Then we choose. Martinez stared at the message. What happens in 3 days? Joseph looked grim. The barrier between worlds gets thin. They'll be able to take whoever they want. I spent the rest of the night making plans. We had to get these kids out of the forest. But the bus wasn't coming for 2 more days. And somehow, I knew the Moon-Eyed children wouldn't wait. The next day, everything went wrong at once. Our radio stopped working. The ranger station couldn't reach us. Martinez's police radio just produced static. Even our emergency satellite phone was dead. They're isolating us, Joseph said, cutting us off from the outside world. Worse, the forest itself seemed to be changing. Paths that had been there for years suddenly led nowhere. Trees had moved overnight, I was sure of it. The stream that ran behind our cabin was flowing uphill. This is impossible, Martinez kept saying. Water doesn't flow uphill. But it was happening. By evening, 6 of the 12 kids were acting strange. They spoke in whispers and kept looking toward the forest with longing expressions. Tommy was the worst. He'd started drawing pictures of pale children and refused to eat. They're calling to us, he said when I asked what was wrong. They say they have games we've never seen before. Games that go on forever. I made a decision. We couldn't wait for the bus. We had to hike out tonight. But when we tried to leave, we couldn't find the trail. The forest path that led back to the main road had vanished. Every direction we walked just led deeper into the woods. We were trapped. As darkness fell, the Moon-Eyed children came back. This time there were dozens of them. They filled the spaces between trees like pale shadows, watching our cabin with those white, pupilless eyes. A girl who looked about 7 stepped forward. Despite her appearance, her voice carried the weight of centuries. I am Ayana, she said. I speak for the children of the forest. We have played alone for too long. We need new friends. I stepped outside to face her, though every instinct screamed at me to run. These children are not for you, I said. Ayana tilted her head. All children are for us, Catherine. That is the old law. The forest law. What are you? We are what remains when childhood never ends. We have played the same games for 300 years. Hide and seek, tag, ring around the rosy, but games are more fun with new players. Around her, the other Moon-Eyed children giggled and clapped their hands. The sound was horrible, joy without warmth, laughter without happiness. Where is Mark? I demanded. Mark has learned our games. Would you like to see? The trees began to move, not swaying, actually moving, walking on their roots like massive legs. They formed a circle around us, their branches weaving together overhead. In the center of the circle, the ground opened up. Not like a hole being dug, but like the earth was a curtain being pulled aside. Below was a hollow space filled with soft, glowing light. And there was Mark. He sat in the hollow playing patty cake with 3 Moon-Eyed children. He looked exactly the same as when he'd disappeared, but his eyes were white now, just like theirs. Mark. I called down to him. He looked up and waved cheerfully. Hi, Miss Millbrook. Want to come play? We're learning a new game. It's fun. His voice sounded right, but empty. Like an echo of himself. You see, Ayana said. Mark is happy now. He will never grow old, never be sad, never stop playing. Isn't that what every child wants? That's not living, I said. That's not growing up. Growing up is pain, said Ayana. Growing up is losing the magic. We keep the magic forever. Behind me, I heard the cabin door open. The affected kids were coming outside, walking toward the hollow like sleepwalkers. No. I moved to block them, but Ayana raised her hand. The choosing has begun, Catherine. 6 of your children hear our call. They want to join our games. I won't let you take them. Then play with us, Ayana said. Win our game, and they can go. Lose, and they stay forever. I looked at Tommy, Sarah, and the other affected kids. They stood at the edge of the hollow, ready to jump down and join Mark. What game? I asked. Ayana smiled. The listening game. We will hide in the forest and make sounds. You must find us by sound alone. If you find all 6 before the moon sets, your children go free. I looked up. The moon was already halfway across the sky, maybe 3 hours until it set. And if I lose? Then you join our games too, forever and ever. I thought about my 13 years in the forest, my 8 years teaching special education kids, all the times I'd had to listen extra carefully because of my damaged hearing. I accept. The moon-eyed children scattered into the forest like whispers. I had my flashlight and my ranger training, but I was hunting supernatural beings who had been playing hiding games for centuries. But they'd made a mistake. They didn't know about my hearing loss. Didn't know that losing hearing in one ear had taught me to pinpoint sounds in ways most people couldn't. The first child was easy. She was giggling behind a massive oak tree, not trying very hard to hide. I tagged her gently on the shoulder. "Found," I said. She smiled and faded away like mist. The second one was harder. He was making bird calls from up in the canopy, but I knew bird calls, and his was just a little off. Too perfect, too pretty. The third and fourth children tried to trick me by making sounds from the same location, but my damaged hearing could tell the difference in distance and direction. 2 sources, not one. With 2 hours left, I'd found 4 of the 6. But the last 2 had gone completely silent. That's when I remembered something Joseph had taught me about Cherokee hunting techniques. When you can't hear your prey, you feel for vibrations in the ground. I knelt down and pressed my palm to the earth. There. Tiny footsteps running in a circle around me. One of them was playing Ring Around the Rosie by herself, moving so fast she was just a blur. "Found," I said, reaching out to touch her as she ran past. 1 left. 30 minutes until moonset. The last child was clever. She'd gone completely still and silent. No sound, no movement, no vibration. But after 8 years teaching special education, I'd learned that kids always give themselves away somehow. I closed my eyes and listened to the forest. Wind in the leaves, a creek running nearby, an owl calling, and breathing. Careful, controlled breathing from someone trying very hard not to make noise. I opened my eyes and looked up. There she was, hanging upside down from a branch like a bat, trying not to breathe too loud. "Found," I said. Ayanna appeared beside me as the last child faded away. "You have won, Catherine Millbrook. Your children may go." "And Mark?" "Mark chose to stay. He likes our games now. But we will honor our agreement." The forest began to change back to normal. The moved trees returned to their proper places. The stream flowed downhill again. In the hollow, I could see Mark waving goodbye as the earth closed over him. The affected kids blinked and looked around like they were waking up from a dream. "What happened?" Tommy asked. I had the strangest dream. By morning, our radios worked again. The hiking trail back to the road reappeared. When the bus came that afternoon, I sent the kids home with instructions to their parents about counseling for the traumatic experience of their counselor going missing. Martinez finished her investigation. The forensics team found DNA evidence on the log from multiple missing persons over the decades. It became a major cold case breakthrough, though they never found any bodies. Mark Stevens was listed as missing, presumed dead. His family held a memorial service. I stayed in Joyce Kilmer Forest. Joseph helped me set up permanent protection symbols at all the trail entrances. We negotiated with Ayanna for a formal truce. The moon-eyed children could keep their part of the forest, but they had to leave marked trails alone. It's been 6 months now. The forest is quiet, peaceful, normal. But sometimes, on nights when the moon is dark, I still hear children laughing in the distance, playing their eternal games, waiting for someone to join them. I keep my radio close and my flashlight charged, because I know that somewhere in the hollow spaces beneath the ancient trees, Mark Stevens is still playing patty cake, still smiling with those empty white eyes, still a child forever, and the moon-eyed children are still waiting for new friends to join their games. The forest remembers everything, and some games never end. My name is Dorothy Fairweather, and I've been a park ranger for 18 years. 18 years of pulling lost hikers off cliffs, treating broken bones in caves, and talking scared climbers down from ledges they never should have tried. I know every sound the Red River Gorge can make: wind whistling through stone arches, water rushing over rocks after a storm, the echo of voices bouncing between canyon walls. But the woman I heard screaming that cold March morning in 1975, she'd been falling for over a century. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when the call came in. Sally's voice crackled over the radio from the visitor center, 12 miles away through winding mountain roads. Dorothy, we got 3 separate reports of a woman screaming for help somewhere around Panther Creek. Different folks heard her, but they can't agree on where the sound came from. I set down my mug and reached for my jacket. March in Kentucky meant the weather could change fast: sunny morning, stormy afternoon, ice by evening. Any missing persons reported? That's the weird part. Nobody's missing. All the registered climbing groups checked in this morning. I grabbed my medical kit and rope gear. After losing my twin sister to drowning when we were 16, I'd become a nurse before switching to ranger work. I couldn't save Sarah, but I'd spent 18 years making sure other people's sisters made it home safe. The drive to Panther Creek took 40 minutes on roads that twisted like broken bones. The limestone cliffs rose 200 feet on both sides, covered in hemlock trees so thick they blocked most of the sunlight. Even at noon, it felt like twilight down there. I parked at the trailhead and checked my radio. The signal was weak, it always was in the gorge. The stone walls played tricks with sound, making voices seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, nothing. In my experience, when the forest goes silent, something's wrong. I followed the main trail toward Panther Creek, stopping every few minutes to listen. The path wound between huge boulders that had fallen from the cliffs thousands of years ago. Some were big as houses, creating caves and passages that could hide anything. 20 minutes in, I heard it. A woman's voice, high and desperate, calling from somewhere above me. "Help! Please, someone help me!" I looked up at the cliff face. It was straight sandstone, impossible to climb without ropes and gear. But the voice definitely came from up there. "Hello," I called back. "Where are you? Can you see me?" Silence. Then, from completely the opposite direction, "I'm falling. Oh God, I'm falling." The hair on my arms stood up. No echo I'd ever heard worked like that. Sound didn't just jump from one side of the gorge to the other. I pulled out my radio. "Sally, this is Dorothy. I'm at Panther Creek. I can hear someone calling for help, but I can't locate them." The voice seems to be coming from the cliff face. Static answered me. The radio was dead. I spent 3 hours searching every cave, every ledge, every possible hiding spot. I found old campsites, some trash left by careless hikers, even an abandoned rope from a climbing accident years ago. But no person, no tracks, no sign anyone had been there in days. The screaming continued the whole time, moving around the gorge like it had wings. Sometimes it sounded close enough to touch, other times it echoed from so far away I could barely hear it. But always the same voice, a woman in terrible fear, begging for help. As the sun started setting, the temperature dropped fast. I knew I had to head back before dark, but leaving felt wrong. Someone was out there. Someone needed help. That's when I heard her speaking words instead of just screaming. "The stones will fall," the voice whispered. So close it felt like breath on my neck. "The stones will fall and take the children with them." I spun around, nobody there, just shadows getting longer between the rocks. I ran back to my truck, my medical training fighting with pure animal fear. My hands shook as I started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could swear I saw a white figure standing on a ledge that jutted out from the cliff face, a ledge I'd checked twice and found empty. By the time I turned around for a better look, nothing was there but stone and gathering darkness. The next morning, I drove into town to check the local newspaper archives. If someone was playing a sick joke, I wanted to know about it. If someone really needed help, I had to find them. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, helped me pull papers going back 50 years. "Looking for anything specific, Dorothy?" "Reports of people hearing voices in the gorge, missing persons, that kind of thing." She gave me a strange look. "You might want to talk to old Ezekiel McDougall. He knows more stories about that place than anyone." I found Ezekiel sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of cedar. He was 72 years old and had lived in these mountains his whole life. His great-grandfather had come from Scotland in the 1842. "Mr. McDougall, I'm Dorothy Fairweather, the ranger. I was wondering if you'd ever heard stories about voices in Panther Creek." His knife stopped moving. He looked at me with pale blue eyes that seemed to see too much. You heard her, didn't you? The woman who cries for the dead? My stomach went cold. What do you mean? My grandmother called her a bean sidhe, a banshee in the old tongue. She warns of death coming, always has, since my people first settled here. He set down his whittling. What did she tell you? I told him about the voice, the impossible echoes, the words about stones falling. He nodded like he'd heard it all before. She's been trying to warn folks for over 100 years. Problem is, most people think she's the danger instead of the warning. He stood up slowly, joints creaking. Come inside. I'll show you something. His living room was filled with old books and photo albums. He pulled out a thick folder and spread papers across his coffee table. Newspaper clippings, handwritten letters, even some old photographs. 1,876, he said, pointing to a yellowed newspaper clipping. Rock slide at Panther Creek killed a family of 5. 3 days before it happened, people reported hearing a woman screaming in the gorge. He showed me another article. 1,923. Cave-in trapped 4 miners. Week before, folks heard the crying woman again. 1,952. Flash flood caught a church group camping by the creek. Same woman, same warnings. The list went on. Every few years, someone would report the screaming woman. Within days, tragedy would strike somewhere in the gorge. She's not trying to hurt anybody, Ezekiel said. She's trying to save them. But people don't listen. They think it's just mountain superstition. You really believe this? A ghost that predicts accidents? I believe what I've seen with my own eyes. He pulled out a black and white photograph from 1,963. It showed a group of people standing by Panther Creek after a rescue operation. In the background, barely visible on a high ledge, was a white figure. That's from when they pulled those 3 college kids out of Devil's Cave. The woman warned for 2 days before they went missing. My cousin Jake got this picture during the rescue. He pointed to the figure. That's her. That's the bean CD. I stared at the photo. The figure looked exactly like what I'd glimpsed in my rearview mirror. Why is she active now? What's coming? Ezekiel's face went grave. Don't know, but in all the stories I've heard, she only screams that loud when it's going to be bad, real bad. I drove back to the ranger station with my head spinning. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as old mountain folklore, but I couldn't ignore what I'd heard, what I'd seen. That afternoon, I got a call from the climbing permit office. A group of 12 rock climbers from a college in Ohio had registered for a week-long trip to Panther Creek. They were planning to attempt some of the most dangerous routes in the gorge. When do they arrive? I asked. Tomorrow morning. I hung up the phone and stared out the window toward the cliffs. Somewhere in that stone maze, a woman's voice was crying warnings that nobody wanted to believe. 12 young climbers, just like the college kids in 1963. I grabbed my jacket and headed back to Panther Creek. If the bean sidhe was trying to warn me about something, I needed to listen. The screaming started again as soon as I reached the trailhead. This time it was different, more urgent, more desperate. Instead of calling for help, the voice was giving directions. Not the north face. The stones are loose. Go around, go around. I followed the sound deeper into the gorge than I'd ever gone. The path became rougher, harder to follow. Ancient rhododendron bushes grew so thick I had to push through them like a green tunnel. The water rises fast here. Too fast. The voice led me to a section of Panther Creek I'd only seen on maps. The water flowed through a narrow channel between 2 cliff faces. During spring floods, this would become a death trap, nowhere to climb out, water rising 20 feet in minutes. She's right, I whispered to myself. I'd seen the flood marks on the canyon walls. Any climber caught here during a storm wouldn't have a chance. Behind you. I turned around. Nothing there but shadows and stone. Behind you, the voice repeated. Closer now. I spun in a complete circle. Still nothing. But I could feel eyes watching me. Feel a presence just out of sight. Then I saw her. She stood on a ledge, 40 feet up the cliff face, a woman in a white dress that seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the trees. Her long dark hair moved like she was underwater. Her face was pale as moonlight, with eyes that held a century of sorrow. She was beautiful and terrible and impossible. No one could stand where she was standing. That ledge was barely 6 inches wide and smooth as glass. "Who are you?" I called up to her. She pointed toward the creek, then vanished. I looked where she'd pointed, and saw fresh scratches on the rock climbing marks. Someone had been here recently, trying the same route I'd been thinking about. The scratches led up about 30 feet, then stopped abruptly. Above that point, the rock face was covered in a strange white chalk that glowed in the shadows. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. Bone dust. Ground up fragments of bone and teeth, worked into the natural cracks of the stone. I stumbled backward and fell hard on the rocky ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. When I finally gasped for air, I tasted something metallic in my mouth. Blood. My own blood from biting my tongue. "Moira," the voice whispered, right next to my ear. "My name is Moira." I scrambled to my feet and ran. Behind me, the woman's voice rose to a wail that seemed to shake the very stones of the gorge. The sound followed me all the way back to my truck, growing louder and more desperate with each step. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman on the impossible ledge, pointing at the bone dust worked into the rock. I saw 12 college kids with bright new climbing gear, laughing and joking as they headed toward their deaths. At 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and drove back to Ezekiel's house. His lights were on. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked when I knocked on his door. "You know her name, Moira." He nodded. "She was the daughter of Clan McDougal, back in the old country. Fell from Ben Nevis trying to reach her lover's body after an avalanche. The mountain spirits bound her to warn of death, but cursed her to watch helplessly as people ignored her warnings. How many has she tried to save? Hundreds, maybe thousands. She's been here since the first McDougal settled in these hills." He poured me a cup of coffee, with hands that trembled slightly. "The stories say she goes mad sometimes, when too many people die despite her warnings. That's when she becomes dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Her voice can stop a man's heart if she screams loud enough. Can drive people insane if they listen too long. She doesn't mean to hurt anyone, but grief and frustration have twisted her over the years." I thought about the bone dust in the rock, the way my hands had shaken just from seeing her. "The college kids arrive in 6 hours. I have to warn them. They won't listen. They never do. Young folks think they know better than mountain ghosts. Then I have to find another way." Ezekiel was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee. Finally, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a small cloth bag tied with red string. "Rowan berries and iron filings. Protection charm my grandmother made." He handed it to me. "Won't stop the bean city, but might keep you sane enough to help when the time comes." I tied the bag to my belt and headed back toward Panther Creek. Dawn was still 2 hours away, but I needed to scout the climbing routes before the college group arrived. If Moira was right about loose stones and rising water, I had to find the specific dangers and mark them. The forest was different in the pre-dawn darkness. Sounds carried strangely, and shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Twice, I heard footsteps following me, but when I turned around with my flashlight, nothing was there but wet leaves and dark trees. "Moira?" I called softly. "I'm trying to help. Can you show me what's going to happen?" The answer came as a vision that hit me like a physical blow. I saw the college climbers arriving at sunrise, full of excitement and energy. Saw them setting up their ropes on the north face of Devil's Tower, the most challenging climb in the gorge. Saw the leader, a young man with red hair and his girlfriend's name tattooed on his wrist, testing the rock face. The stone looked solid, but Moira's vision showed me the hairline cracks invisible to human eyes. Showed me how the spring freeze-thaw cycle had loosened massive chunks of the cliff. Showed me what would happen when 12 people put their weight on ropes anchored to stone that was ready to fall. The vision ended, and I found myself on my knees in the mud, gasping for air. My nose was bleeding, and my ears rang like I'd been standing next to a church bell. But I knew exactly where the climbers would die, and exactly when. The college group arrived just after sunrise, exactly as Moira had shown me. 12 young people in brand new gear, laughing and taking pictures as they unloaded their van at the trailhead. I was waiting for them. "Morning, folks. I'm Dorothy Fairweather, the ranger for this area. Before you head out, I need to talk to you about some safety concerns." The group leader was exactly as I'd seen in the vision. Red hair, confident smile, girlfriend's name on his wrist. "Sure thing, what's the problem?" "The north face of Devil's Tower is unstable right now. Spring freeze-thaw has loosened some of the rock. I'm going to have to ask you to choose a different route." He frowned, We've been planning this trip for months. That route is the whole reason we came here. I understand, but have there been any actual rock falls? Any documented incidents? His voice had an edge to it now. Because we checked with the Park Service before we came, and nobody mentioned any closures. I had no official reports to back me up. No geological surveys. Nothing but the word of a mountain ghost and a vision that had made my nose bleed. Look, said one of the girls. We're experienced climbers. We know how to test rock stability. And we have the best gear, added another. Top-of-the-line ropes and hardware. They were young and confident and absolutely certain they knew better than some middle-aged ranger with crazy stories about unstable rock. I'd been just like them once. I'm asking you to please consider another route. The east face is just as challenging, and thanks for the concern, the leader said, shouldering his pack, but we'll be fine. I watched them hike toward Devil's Tower, knowing I was watching them walk toward their deaths. The protection charm Ezekiel had given me felt warm against my hip, but it couldn't protect them. I followed at a distance, hoping I was wrong. Hoping the vision had been just stress and lack of sleep playing tricks on my mind. But Moira was there too, walking alongside the group like a guardian angel made of sorrow. None of them could see her, but I watched her point at the loose stones, gesture frantically at the hairline cracks, tried desperately to warn them of dangers they couldn't perceive. When they reached the base of Devil's Tower, the leader started setting up the first anchor point exactly where Moira had shown me, right in the middle of a section that looked solid but was actually held in place by nothing more than habit and ice. Please, I called out one last time. Just test a different section first. Humor me. We know what we're doing, the leader called back, already halfway up the rock face. That's when Moira's patience finally broke. Her scream started low, like wind in a cave, then built to a wail that seemed to come from the stone itself. The sound hit the climbers like a physical force, sending two of them stumbling backward. Birds exploded from the trees. Small rocks began falling from the cliff face. What the hell was that? Someone shouted. I saw Moira standing directly behind the leader, her mouth open in an endless cry of warning and despair. She was no longer beautiful. Grief and frustration had twisted her face into something terrible. Her eyes were black holes in white bone. Her fingers stretched toward the climbers like gnarled branches. The leader looked right through her and kept climbing. Get down from there, I screamed. But my voice was lost in Moira's wailing. That's when the rocks started to fall. Not the big collapse yet, just pieces the size of fists, knocked loose by the supernatural vibrations. One hit the leader's helmet with a crack like a gunshot. Another shattered on the ground, inches from where the other climbers stood. Everybody back, I yelled, running toward them. Get away from the cliff, but it was too late. The leader's anchor point was failing. I could see the cracks spreading through the stone like lightning, could hear the grinding sound of tons of rock starting to shift. Moira's scream reached a pitch that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The protection charm was burning hot against my side, the only thing keeping me on my feet as supernatural sound tried to drive me insane. In that moment of chaos and terror, I finally understood. Moira wasn't just warning about the rockfall. She was showing me how to save them. Her scream wasn't random, it was information. The pitch and rhythm were telling me exactly which way to run, exactly where the safe zones were, exactly how much time we had before the whole north face came down. I grabbed the nearest climber and shoved him toward a cluster of boulders 20 feet away. Cave system, I shouted over Moira's wailing. Behind those rocks, move. The leader was still on the cliff face, his rope anchored to stone that was about to fall. I could see him struggling with his gear, trying to set a new anchor point, but there wasn't time. Cut the rope and jump, I screamed. He looked down at me like I was crazy. Jump 40 feet onto solid rock? That was suicide. But Moira was showing me something else, a pool of water hidden behind a fallen boulder, deep enough to break a fall if you knew exactly where to aim. Trust me, I yelled. Aim for the water behind the big rock. Above us, the crack in the cliff face was spreading faster now. Chunks of stone the size of cars were starting to separate from the main wall. The leader finally cut his rope. He hit the water perfectly, just as Moira had shown me. The impact was still brutal. I heard ribs crack, saw blood in the water, but he was alive. Alive when he should have been crushed under 10 tons of falling stone. The rockfall lasted 3 minutes. It sounded like the world ending. By the time the dust settled, the the entire north face of Devil's Tower had collapsed. The climbing route the college group had planned to use was buried under a mountain of rubble. We spent 4 hours treating injuries and getting everyone back to the trailhead. Broken ribs, cuts from flying stone, one concussion, shock and trauma all around. But no one died. For the first time in over a century, Moira's warnings had been heeded in time. As I loaded the last injured climber into the ambulance, I heard her voice one final time. "Thank you," she whispered, soft as wind through leaves. "Thank you for listening." I turned to look back at the gorge, but she was gone. Not just hidden, gone completely. The oppressive feeling that had hung over Panther Creek for days was lifting like fog in sunlight. Ezekiel was waiting at the hospital when I got there. "She's at peace now," he said. "First time in more than 100 years, someone listened to her warnings in time to save lives. That's all she ever wanted." "Is she gone for good?" "From here, yes. But there are other places, other dangers. The bean seed he go where they're needed most." He smiled. "You've got the sight now, Dorothy. You'll hear them when they call." He was right. Over the next 6 months, I started noticing things other people missed. The way birds would suddenly go quiet before rock slides. The strange echoes that meant flash floods were coming. The cold spots that marked places where the veil between worlds was thin. I never saw Moira again, but I felt her influence in every rescue I made, a whisper in the wind that told me which cave to check first. A feeling that made me pack extra medical supplies on days when nothing was supposed to go wrong. A certainty that helped me find lost hikers in impossible places. The official report on the Devil's Tower collapse blamed it on natural geological processes, spring freeze-thaw cycles, erosion, normal cliff deterioration. The fact that a ranger happened to be there when it happened was just lucky timing. I never mentioned the bean seed he. Who would believe me? But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the ranger station, I hear voices on the wind. Women calling from other valleys, other mountains, trying to warn people who won't listen about dangers they can't see. Most folks think they're just echoes, just tricks of sound bouncing off stone walls. They go about their business, confident in their modern gear and scientific understanding, never knowing how many times they've been saved by warnings they dismissed as imagination. I know better now. I listen. And when I hear the crying woman of whatever creek or canyon needs protecting, I pack my medical kit and grab my radio and head toward the sound of supernatural sorrow trying desperately to save human lives. Because that's what rangers do. We respond when someone calls for help, even if that someone has been dead for more than a century. Especially then, the mountains have long memories, and the spirits that guard them never stop caring about the living. All they've ever asked is that we listen when they try to warn us. Most people never learn that lesson, but I did, and it's made all the difference. My name is William Darkwater, and for 15 years I've been protecting Cherokee sacred sites in the Blue Ridge Mountains. People think being a park ranger is just about wildlife and hikers, but when you're part Cherokee like me, and you've got a PhD in anthropology, your job becomes something different. You become a bridge between two worlds, the academic world that studies Native American culture and the spiritual world that lives it. It was August 1987, and the heat was crushing everything in the Pisgah National Forest. Even at elevation, the humidity made your shirt stick to your back within minutes of walking outside. I'd been getting reports about strange activity at some of our most sacred Cherokee sites along Devil's Backbone Ridge. Nothing too serious, just hikers saying they'd seen dark figures moving around the old ceremonial circles at night. Devil's Backbone got its name from the way the rocky ridge curves like a giant spine through the mountains. The Cherokee called it something different, a name that meant place where shadows dance. My grandmother told me that story when I was little, but I'd filed it away with all the other legends. After all, I was a scientist first. The sacred sites up there were special. Stone circles arranged in patterns that had meaning to my ancestors 500 years ago. Medicine wheels that helped Cherokee shamans connect with the spirit world. As a federal cultural resource specialist, it was my job to protect these places from vandals and treasure hunters. What I didn't expect was having to protect them from something else entirely. I remember that first morning clearly. I was checking the security cameras we'd installed at the main ceremonial site, a beautiful circle of stones on a flat area near the ridge top. The camera feeds came back to my office 15 miles away through a radio relay system. When I pulled up the footage from the night before, something was wrong. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. In the infrared image, I could see the stone circle clearly, but there were shadows moving inside it. Not the shadows of trees or animals. These shadows moved wrong. They seemed to dance in patterns around the stones, even though there was no light source to cast them. I rewound the tape and watched again. The shadows were definitely there, moving like people performing some kind of ritual. But the weird thing was, the camera didn't show any actual people, just the shadows themselves, dark against the lighter ground. My first thought was equipment malfunction. These early infrared cameras weren't perfect, and the electronics could act up in the mountain weather. But when I checked the other cameras at different sites, I found the same thing. Shadows dancing around stone circles with no one there to cast them. I called my colleague Dr. Amanda Rivers, an archaeologist who helped document these sites. Amanda was pure science. Everything had a logical explanation if you just looked hard enough. Probably just camera artifacts, she said over the phone. You know how those infrared sensors can create false images, heat signatures bouncing off rocks, maybe some kind of electronic interference. That made sense. It should have made sense. But something in my gut told me this wasn't just equipment failure. My Cherokee grandmother used to say that shadows could move on their own when the barrier between worlds got thin. At the time, I thought she was just telling old stories to scare kids into behaving. Now I wasn't so sure. I decided to drive up to Devil's Backbone that afternoon to check the sites in person. The 15-mile drive from the ranger station took me through winding mountain roads that got steeper and narrower as they climbed. By the time I reached the trailhead, I was at 4,200 feet elevation, and the air felt cleaner despite the heat. The hike to the main ceremonial site was about 2 miles through dense mountain laurel and rhododendron. These plants grow so thick in places that they form tunnels you have to crawl through. But they also create a sense of isolation that's almost complete. Once you're a mile from the road, the only sounds are wind, insects, and your own breathing. As I got closer to the stone circle, something felt different. Wrong, somehow. The forest was too quiet. In 15 years of hiking these mountains, I'd learned to read the natural rhythms. Birds should have been calling. Squirrels should have been rustling through the leaves. Instead, there was just silence. When I reached the ceremonial site, everything looked normal. The stone circle sat on its flat clearing exactly as it should. No signs of disturbance, no evidence of visitors. But the feeling of wrongness was stronger here. The air felt heavy, like just before a thunderstorm, even though the sky was clear. I checked the camera equipment. Everything seemed to be working fine. The infrared sensors were clean, the radio transmitter was functioning, and the battery levels were good. I couldn't find anything that would explain the strange shadows on the recordings. That's when I noticed my GPS was acting up. Instead of showing my exact location, it was drifting around randomly. First it said I was 50 yards north of where I actually stood. Then it jumped to showing me 100 yards east. The elevation readings were wrong too, shifting between numbers that made no sense. Electronic equipment can malfunction for lots of reasons in the mountains. Temperature changes, humidity, even solar activity can mess with sensitive instruments. But I'd never seen GPS readings drift like this before. I decided to stay until dark to see if I could spot whatever was causing the camera anomalies. As the sun went down behind the ridge, shadows started growing longer around the stone circle. Normal shadows from the trees and rocks around the clearing. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Just as full darkness settled over the mountain, I saw them, moving shadows inside the stone circle, just like in the camera footage. But this time I was watching with my own eyes, and there was definitely nothing there to cast those shadows. The shapes moved like people dancing, but they were pure black silhouettes against the lighter ground. They seemed to glide rather than walk, flowing around the stones in patterns that looked almost like a ceremony, an ancient Cherokee dance, but performed wrong somehow. The movements were too fluid, too perfect, like they were following a rhythm I couldn't hear. I counted 7 distinct shadow figures, each about the size of a human adult. They moved independently, but in coordination, like they were all listening to the same unheard music. The weird thing was, they were dancing in the traditional Cherokee style, or at least close to it. Whoever or whatever these things were, they knew something about our ceremonies. My radio started crackling with static. I tried to call back to headquarters, but all I got was electronic noise punctuated by sounds that almost seemed like voices. Very faint, speaking in what might have been Cherokee, but too distorted to understand. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in the space of a minute. I could see my breath in the suddenly cold air, even though it had been 80 degrees just moments before. The cold seemed to be coming from the stone circle itself, radiating outward like the stones were made of ice. I wanted to run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back to the truck and drive away as fast as possible. But I was a federal law enforcement officer, and these sites were under my protection. If someone was performing unauthorized ceremonies here, even someone I couldn't quite see, it was my job to investigate. I stepped closer to the stone circle, pulling out my flashlight. The moment the beam hit the dancing shadows, they stopped moving. All 7 figures turned toward me in perfect unison. They had no faces that I could see, no features at all. Just human-shaped darkness that somehow managed to look directly at me. "This is a protected site," I called out, my voice sounding weak in the strange silence. "You need to identify yourselves and explain what you're doing here." The shadow figures didn't respond, but they started moving again. This time, instead of dancing around the stones, they began moving toward me. Slowly at first, then faster. They didn't walk or run, they flowed across the ground like spilled ink, maintaining their human shapes but moving in ways that defied physics. That's when I ran. I crashed through the mountain laurel, following the trail by memory and the weak beam of my flashlight. Branches grabbed at my uniform and scratched my face, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I could hear something following. Not footsteps exactly, but a sound like wind rushing through dead leaves, even though the night was still. I made it back to my truck in record time, my heart pounding and my lungs burning from the sprint. As I fumbled with the keys, I looked back toward the trail. In the distance, I could see what looked like 7 dark shapes standing at the edge of the forest, watching me. They didn't pursue me into the parking area, but they didn't disappear either. They just waited. The drive back to town was the longest 15 miles of my life. My radio equipment kept malfunctioning, producing that same static mixed with faint voices. The GPS in my truck showed me driving through empty space, then suddenly jumping to locations hundreds of miles away. Even my watch stopped working properly, the hands spinning randomly around the dial. By the time I reached the ranger station, everything was back to normal. Radio worked fine, GPS showed accurate readings, my watch was keeping perfect time again. It was like the electronic chaos had been contained to the area around Devil's Backbone. I spent the rest of the night writing reports and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Shadow figures that moved without light sources. Electronic equipment going haywire in specific locations. Temperature drops that defied the laws of physics. None of it made scientific sense. But it made Cherokee sense. The next morning, I called Elder Thomas Sequoia, an old friend of my family, who lived on the Cherokee Reservation in western North Carolina. Thomas was in his 70s and had spent his entire life learning the traditional spiritual practices that most Cherokee had forgotten. If anyone could help me understand what I'd encountered, it would be him. "Sounds like Kitowa and Vaihi," he said after I described what I'd seen. "Shadow spirits from the dark realm. My grandfather told me stories about them, but I thought they were just legends, meant to teach respect for sacred places." "What do they want?" I asked. "They feed on spiritual energy," Thomas explained. "Sacred sites like your stone circles are full of power that's been built up over centuries of ceremony and prayer. The shadows want to drain that power for themselves, but they have to corrupt the sites first, make them spiritually dirty." That explained the wrong-looking dances I'd witnessed. The shadow figures weren't just performing Cherokee ceremonies, they were deliberately performing them incorrectly, polluting the sacred space with negative spiritual energy. "How do we stop them?" I asked. "Traditional protection ceremonies," Thomas said, "but it has to be done by someone with Cherokee blood, who understands both the old ways and the new ones. Someone like you, William." I hung up the phone with a growing sense of dread. I'd spent my career studying Cherokee culture from an academic perspective, but I'd never really believed in the spiritual aspects. Now I was being told that my mixed heritage, part Cherokee, part white, straddling both scientific and traditional worldviews, might be the only thing standing between these shadow entities and the destruction of sacred sites throughout the Blue Ridge Mountains. Over the next 3 days, I received reports of similar shadow activity at 4 other Cherokee ceremonial sites within a 50-mile radius. Each report followed the same pattern: hikers seeing dark figures performing rituals at night, electronic equipment malfunctioning in the area, and sudden temperature drops around the stone circles. Whatever these shadow dancers were, they weren't limiting themselves to Devil's Backbone. They were systematically targeting Cherokee sacred sites throughout the region, and they seemed to be getting bolder with each passing night. On the 4th night, they started taking people. The first victim was Janet Morrison, a 3-4-year-old teacher from Asheville who liked to camp alone in the mountains. She'd set up her tent about a quarter-mile from one of the affected ceremonial sites, following all the proper backcountry protocols. Janet was experienced. She'd been hiking these mountains for 10 years without incident. A day hiker found her the next morning, sitting upright in her tent with her eyes open, completely unresponsive. She was breathing, her heart was beating, but she wouldn't react to voices, touch, or light shined in her eyes. The paramedics said she was in some kind of catatonic state, but all her vital signs were normal. What scared me was her appearance. Janet's hair had turned completely gray overnight. Her skin was pale and cold to the touch, and there were dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in weeks. But the worst part was that she felt empty somehow. When you looked at her, it was like looking at a shell with nothing inside. The doctors at the hospital couldn't find anything wrong with her medically. Blood tests were normal. Brain scans showed no signs of stroke or trauma. But Janet Morrison remained completely unresponsive, staring at nothing with empty eyes. I knew what had happened to her, even if I couldn't prove it. The shadow dancers had found their first human victim. That same night, I returned to Devil's Backbone with backup. Jake Thunderheart, a young Cherokee ranger who'd been asking questions about the strange reports. Jake was 28, fresh out of law enforcement training, and still connected to his tribal traditions in ways I'd lost growing up in the academic world. We hiked to the main ceremonial site just before sunset, carrying camping gear and electronic monitoring equipment. If the shadows were going to appear again, I wanted to document everything properly. This time I had backup cameras, audio recorders, electromagnetic field detectors, and a satellite phone that should work even if the local radio systems failed. As darkness fell, the familiar signs started appearing. Temperature dropped rapidly around the stone circle. Electronic equipment began malfunctioning with the same chaotic patterns I'd experienced before. The EMF detector went crazy, showing energy readings that spiked and dropped randomly. Then they came. 7 shadow figures materialized inside the stone circle, but this time they weren't alone. Standing in the center of their formation was the shadow of a woman, tall, motionless, and somehow more substantial than the dancing figures around her. Even as pure shadow, she radiated authority and malevolent intelligence. "That's her," Jake whispered. "That's the one who took the camper's spirit." The woman shadow turned toward us, and I felt a cold pressure in my mind, like someone trying to push their way into my thoughts. Images flashed through my consciousness. Janet Morrison sitting alone by her campfire, unaware that shadows were creeping closer through the darkness. The moment of contact when the woman shadow touched her, draining away her life force and leaving behind an empty shell. But the vision didn't stop there. I saw other victims scattered across the mountains, hikers who'd been found in similar catatonic states over the past month, all near Cherokee sacred sites. Cases that had been written off as heat stroke or psychological episodes. The shadow dancers had been feeding for weeks, and we'd never connected the incidents. "There are more victims," I told Jake. "A lot more." The 7 dancing shadows began moving toward us, flowing across the ground in their impossible way. But this time, they were moving faster and with clear purpose. They weren't just investigating, they were hunting. Jake pulled out a small leather pouch that hung around his neck. "Traditional protection," he said, sprinkling tobacco and sage around our feet while speaking Cherokee words I didn't understand. The approaching shadows slowed but didn't stop. The protection was only buying us time. My satellite phone started working just long enough to call Elder Thomas Sequoia. I described what we were seeing, and his response was immediate and urgent. "You're seeing a harvest ritual," he said. The shadows have been preparing for weeks, corrupting the sacred sites and collecting human spiritual energy. Now they're ready to open a permanent gateway between their realm and ours. How do we stop them? Jake asked, leaning close to hear the conversation. The traditional way requires a spiritual leader who knows the ancient ceremonies, Thomas replied. But there's another way. Disrupt their ritual with a stronger one. You'll need to perform a cleansing ceremony at the main site while they're trying to corrupt it. Fight spiritual fire with spiritual fire. The shadow figures had reached the edge of Jake's protective circle. Where they touched the blessed tobacco, there were flashes of light like small lightning strikes. The protection was holding, but barely. I don't know the ceremonies, I said into the phone. Your grandmother taught you, Thomas replied. You just need to remember. The words are in your blood, William. Your Cherokee heritage isn't just academic knowledge, it's spiritual connection. The woman shadow raised her arms, and the dancing figures began moving in a new pattern. This wasn't the corrupted Cherokee ceremony I'd seen before. This was something older and much darker. The temperature plummeted to near freezing, and frost began forming on the grass around the stone circle. That's when I felt it. Memories surfacing from deep in my childhood. My grandmother's voice teaching me Cherokee prayers I thought I'd forgotten. The meaning of the ceremonial patterns. The proper way to call on spiritual protection for sacred places. As the memories came flooding back, I realized Thomas was right. My academic study of Cherokee culture hadn't been separate from my heritage. It had been preparation for this moment. Understanding both the traditional spiritual knowledge and the modern threats to sacred sites had prepared me to fight the shadow dancers on their own terms. But first, we had to survive the night. The protective circle was failing. Jake's tobacco and sage could only do so much against entities this powerful. The shadow figures were pressing closer, and I could feel that same cold pressure in my mind, much stronger now. They were trying to drain our life force the way they drained Janet Morrison's. We need to reach the center of the stone circle, I told Jake. That's where the spiritual power is strongest. If we're going to perform a counter-ritual, it has to be from inside their ceremony. Jake looked at the 7 shadows surrounding us and the malevolent woman shadow waiting in the center of the stone circle. That's suicide. The moment we leave this protection, they'll take us. He was probably right. But I was starting to understand something important about these entities. They followed spiritual rules, even if they were trying to corrupt them. They couldn't just attack randomly, they had to complete their ritual first. And that gave us an opportunity. They can't stop their ceremony once it's started, I realized. If we disrupt it at the right moment, when they're fully committed to opening their gateway, we might be able to turn their own spiritual energy against them. It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. The shadow dancers were growing stronger by the minute, and somewhere in the mountains, more innocent people were probably being drained of their life force to fuel this dark ritual. I took a deep breath, said a prayer to my Cherokee ancestors, and stepped outside the protective circle. The moment I crossed the line of blessed tobacco, the cold hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just temperature, it was the absence of spiritual warmth. Life force being pulled from my body by entities that existed only to consume. My vision started to blur, and I could feel my energy draining away. But I kept walking toward the stone circle, fighting against the pull of the shadow dancers. Jake was right beside me, his Cherokee prayers creating a small buffer against the spiritual assault. But I could see he was struggling too. His face was pale, and ice crystals were forming on his uniform. The woman shadow watched us approach with what felt like amusement. She was feeding on our life force as we got closer, growing more solid and defined. For the first time, I could make out features in her shadow face, eyes like black holes and a smile that promised spiritual death. You cannot stop what has already begun, she said, her voice echoing inside my head rather than coming through my ears. 7 sites have been corrupted. 7 human spirits have been harvested. The gateway opens tonight, and your realm will become part of ours. That's when I understood the true scope of what we were facing. This wasn't just about protecting Cherokee sacred sites. The shadow dancers were using these locations as anchor points to permanently merge their dark realm with our physical world. Once the gateway opened, shadows would be able to feed on human spiritual energy everywhere, not just at sacred sites. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my grandmother's medicine bag. a small leather pouch I'd carried for 15 years without really understanding its significance. Inside were herbs, stones, and a small piece of sacred wood from the original Cherokee homeland. My grandmother had given it to me when I started working as a cultural resource specialist, saying I might need it someday to protect sacred places. Now I finally understood what she meant. As I entered the stone circle, the 7 dancing shadows surrounded Jake and me. I could feel them pressing closer, their cold presence making it hard to breathe. But I also felt something else, the spiritual power that had been built up in this place over centuries of Cherokee ceremonies. It was still there, just buried under the corruption the shadow dancers had spread. I opened my grandmother's medicine bag and began sprinkling the sacred herbs around the central stone. As each herb touched the ground, there were small flashes of warm light, the opposite of the cold lightning where shadows met Jake's protective tobacco. "In the name of my Cherokee ancestors," I said, the traditional words coming back to me as clearly as if my grandmother was standing beside me, "I call on the spiritual protectors of this sacred place." The woman's shadow hissed and raised her arms higher. The 7 dancers spun faster around us, creating a vortex of spiritual darkness that made the world seem to tilt and blur. But the herbs continued to glow, and I could feel the original spiritual energy of the site beginning to respond. "Jake," I called out, "you need to help me complete the circle. Sprinkle your protection tobacco around the outer stones while I work on the center." Jake nodded and began moving around the edge of the stone circle, fighting against the shadow dancers who tried to block his path. Every time he placed tobacco on a stone and spoke Cherokee protection words, that stone began to glow with the same warm light as my grandmother's herbs. The woman shadow realized what we were doing and directed all 7 dancers to attack at once. They flowed toward us like a wave of liquid darkness, no longer maintaining their human shapes. This was their true form, pure spiritual hunger without any pretense of ceremony or intelligence. That's when I remembered the most important thing my grandmother had taught me. Cherokee spiritual practices weren't just about individual protection. They were about balance, maintaining the harmony between physical and spiritual worlds. The shadow dancers were creatures of pure spiritual imbalance, existing only to consume and corrupt. I placed my hands on the central stone and spoke the words of the old cleansing ceremony, the one used to restore balance to sacred places that had been spiritually polluted. But I did something my ancestors hadn't been able to do. I combined it with my academic understanding of how these sites functioned as spiritual focal points. The stone circle wasn't just a place for ceremony, it was a carefully designed spiritual amplifier, using the natural electromagnetic properties of the stones and their geometric arrangement to concentrate and focus spiritual energy. For 500 years, Cherokee ceremonies had been charging this place with positive spiritual force. All I had to do was activate it. As I completed the cleansing ceremony, the central stone began to pulse with warm light. The glow spread to the outer stones where Jake had placed his protective tobacco, creating a network of spiritual energy that connected all the stones in the circle. The effect on the shadow dancers was immediate and devastating. The warm light was exactly the opposite of their cold spiritual darkness. Where the light touched them, they began to dissolve, their shadow forms breaking apart like smoke in a strong wind. The woman's shadow let out a scream that I felt in my bones, rather than heard with my ears. She was fighting against the cleansing energy, trying to maintain her form and complete her gateway ritual. But the spiritual balance was shifting back toward the light. "Your realm calls you home," I said, using words my grandmother had taught me for banishing hostile spirits. "Return to your own place and trouble this sacred ground no more." The woman shadow made one final attempt to drain our life force, directing all her remaining power at Jake and me. For a moment, the cold was so intense I thought we might freeze solid. But the stone circle held, the warm light protecting us from her spiritual assault. Then, with a sound like wind rushing through dead leaves, all 8 shadow figures were pulled backward into what looked like a tear in the air itself. The gateway they'd been trying to open was functioning, but in reverse, instead of bringing their realm into ours, it was sucking them back where they belonged. The tear in reality snapped shut with a sound like thunder, and suddenly we were alone in the stone circle. The oppressive cold was gone, replaced by the normal warmth of an August night. Electronic equipment stopped malfunctioning. The spiritual pressure that had been building for weeks was finally released. But I knew this wasn't over. Not completely. Jake and I spent the rest of that night checking the other 6 Cherokee sacred sites the shadow dancers had corrupted. At each location, we performed the same cleansing ceremony, using traditional Cherokee spiritual practices to restore the natural balance and close any remaining gateways to the shadow realm. It worked, but barely. Some of the sites had been so heavily corrupted that it took multiple ceremonies to clear them completely. And at 2 locations, we found evidence that the shadows had been more successful than we'd realized. Stone arrangements had been permanently altered, changing the spiritual geometry in ways that might take years to repair. Janet Morrison and the other victims began recovering within 48 hours of our cleansing ceremonies. Their life force gradually returned as the spiritual connections to the shadow realm were severed. Janet's hair stayed gray, and she never remembered anything about her encounter with the shadow dancers. But she was alive and whole again. The official reports I filed described equipment malfunctions and coordinated vandalism of cultural resource sites. There was no way to include shadow dancers and spiritual gateways in federal law enforcement paperwork, but I made sure to document everything in my personal files, and I started reaching out to Cherokee spiritual leaders throughout the Southeast. What I learned from those conversations changed everything I thought I knew about my job. The shadow dancer incident wasn't isolated. Cherokee elders from North Carolina to Oklahoma had been dealing with similar spiritual threats for decades, usually in areas where traditional sacred site protection had been weakened by government restrictions or cultural suppression. My academic training in cultural resource protection had prepared me to defend these sites from human threats, but I'd been completely ignorant of the supernatural ones. Elder Thomas Sequoia helped me understand the bigger picture. Sacred sites aren't just historical artifacts, he explained. They're active spiritual infrastructure, like power plants for the forces that keep balance between worlds. When that infrastructure fails or gets corrupted, things from other realms can break through. Over the following months, I quietly developed new protocols for protecting Cherokee sacred sites in the National Forest. On paper, they looked like enhanced security measures and environmental monitoring. In reality, they were spiritual early warning systems designed to detect supernatural threats before they could establish permanent footholds. I also started training other Cherokee cultural resource specialists in traditional protection methods. We couldn't include it in the official curriculum, but we could pass along the knowledge informally, the way spiritual teachings had always been shared. Within 2 years, we had a network of federal employees throughout the Southeast who understood both academic, cultural resource protection, and traditional spiritual defense. The shadow dancers haven't returned to Devil's Backbone, but they haven't disappeared entirely either. Every few months, we get reports from other regions. Strange shadow activity at Native American sacred sites, electronic equipment malfunctions, people found in catatonic states near ceremonial locations. Most of these incidents can be handled by local spiritual leaders before they escalate, but some require our special combination of federal authority and Cherokee spiritual knowledge. What bothers me most is that we're fighting a defensive battle against a threat that's getting stronger. Climate change and cultural disruption are weakening spiritual protections all over North America. As more traditional knowledge is lost and more sacred sites are damaged by development, the barriers between realms get thinner. But there's hope too. Young Cherokee people like Jake Thunderheart are learning to combine traditional spiritual practices with modern protection methods. Cherokee Nation cultural preservation programs are documenting and revitalizing ceremonial practices that had almost been lost. And slowly, federal agencies are beginning to understand that protecting sacred sites requires more than just keeping vandals away. I still hike up to Devil's Backbone at least once a month, checking the stone circle and maintaining the spiritual protections we established that night. The site feels healthy now, warm and welcoming in the way sacred places should feel. Birds sing there again. Wildlife has returned. The natural spiritual balance has been restored. But sometimes, on nights when the moon is dark and the air is still, I can sense something moving in the deeper shadows between the trees. Watching, waiting, testing the boundaries we've worked so hard to maintain. The shadow dancers are patient creatures. They've been trying to break through to our world for centuries, and one defeat isn't going to stop them permanently. They'll keep probing for weaknesses, looking for sacred sites that aren't properly protected, waiting for opportunities to corrupt spiritual infrastructure and open new gateways. That's why my job has become something more than cultural resource protection. I'm a spiritual guardian now, standing watch at the places where two worlds meet. It's not the career I planned when I got my PhD in anthropology, but it's the one my Cherokee ancestors prepared me for. And when I'm walking those mountain trails at night, carrying my grandmother's medicine bag and watching for signs of supernatural corruption, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The shadows may dance again, but they'll find us ready for them. My name is Joshua Flintridge, and I've been surveying these Virginia mountains for 22 years. I know every ridge, every creek, every dangerous mine shaft from here to the Tennessee border. Or at least I thought I did. It was November 15th, 1979, when I got the call about illegal mining up on Copper Mountain. Snow was starting to stick to the higher peaks, and I should have waited until spring. But someone was pulling copper out of protected forest land, and my job was to stop them before they poisoned the whole watershed. I loaded my truck with the usual gear, seismic monitor, soil samples kit, camera, and enough food for 3 days. The old mining roads were already getting sketchy with the early freeze, but my four-wheel drive could handle it. What I couldn't handle was what I found up there. The first sign of trouble wasn't the illegal mining equipment, it was the bones. I'd parked near the main shaft entrance, about 2 miles up from the last decent road. The November air bit at my face as I unpacked my equipment. 20 years ago, this whole mountainside had been scarred with copper mines. Now the forest was taking it back, but slowly. Rusted cables still hung from rotting wooden towers, and dark holes in the mountainside marked where men had dug for metal. I set up my seismic monitor first. Standard procedure when investigating mining activity. Any blasting or heavy equipment shows up as ground vibration. But the readings were already strange. Little tremors every few minutes, like something moving deep underground. No pattern to it, no industrial signature. That's when I noticed the bone arrangements. Someone had placed animal skulls around the mine entrance. Deer, raccoon, even what looked like a bear skull. They weren't scattered like you'd expect from natural deaths. They were arranged in a perfect circle, all facing the dark mouth of the shaft. In the center sat a copper pot, green with age, filled with what looked like human teeth. I'd seen plenty of weird stuff over the years. People left all kinds of junk around old mines. But this felt different. The bones were clean, bleached white, like they'd been scrubbed. And they were fresh, no moss, no weathering, like someone had placed them there yesterday. My compass started acting up near the entrance. The needle spun wildly, couldn't find north. I tapped the case, thinking maybe the cold had messed with it somehow. But even when I walked 50 feet away, it kept spinning. Something about this place was affecting magnetic fields. The temperature readings were wrong too. My thermometer showed the ground near the mine entrance running 10 degrees warmer than the surrounding forest. In November, with snow starting to fall, the warm spots formed lines leading into the shaft, like heat was rising from deep underground. I'd investigated maybe 100 illegal mining operations in my career. Usually you find tire tracks, equipment marks, fresh digging, signs of people working. Here, I found evidence of recent copper extraction, but no footprints, no vehicle tracks. Like the metal had pulled itself out of the ground. The illegal mining was real though. Someone had taken maybe 50 pounds of copper ore from the deeper shafts. High-grade stuff that would bring good money. But they'd used old techniques, hand tools, small charges, the kind of careful work you'd expect from someone who knew these mines from way back. I photographed everything, took soil samples, checked radiation levels. All standard procedure. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from those dark tunnel mouths. Every time I turned my back to take measurements, I felt eyes on me. The worst part was the sound. Deep underground, something was moving. Not the normal settling you hear in old mines. This sounded like rocks being deliberately arranged. Like something was building down there in the dark. Every few minutes, I'd hear a distant rattle, like a snake's tail. But much larger. Much louder. As the sun started getting low, I made camp near the truck. Standard safety protocol. Never go into unknown mines alone, especially near dark. I'd explore the shafts tomorrow with proper lighting and backup communication. But as I sat by my small camp stove, eating beans from a can, the rattling got louder and closer. I woke up to my seismic monitor screaming. The digital display showed vibrations that made no sense. Regular pulses, like a heartbeat, coming from about 100 feet underground. But the frequency was all wrong, too organized, too intentional. It was still dark, maybe 4 a.m. The rattling had stopped, but something else had replaced it. A sound like rocks grinding against each other, like something huge was moving through solid stone. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the bone circle around the mine entrance. The skulls had been rearranged. Now they all faced my camp, and the copper pot was gone. My hands shook as I documented the changes with my camera. 22 years of mountain experience, and I'd never seen anything like this. Animals don't rearrange human artifacts. People don't move silently through a camp without leaving tracks. The grinding sound was getting louder. I packed up fast and moved my gear closer to the truck. Whatever was happening here, I needed to be ready to leave quickly. But my professional duty was clear. Document the illegal mining, file a report, get the area secured. I couldn't run just because some bones got moved around. As dawn broke gray and cold through the trees, I decided to explore the main shaft. Standard procedure with full safety gear. Helmet, lamp, rope, radio beacon. I'd go in 50 feet, document what I found, and get out. The entrance tunnel sloped down at a steep angle, carved from solid rock more than a century ago. My lamp beam showed the rough tool marks where miners had dug by hand in black powder blast. The air smelled like copper and something else, something organic and rotten. 20 feet in, I found the first body, or what was left of one. The skeleton sat propped against the tunnel wall like it was resting. Clean white bones, no flesh, but the clothes were recent. Jeans, work boots, a flannel shirt, modern illegal miner, probably died within the last few months. But the bones were wrong. Every single bone had been separated, cleaned, and carefully reassembled, like a museum display. The skull sat perfectly balanced on the spine. The arm bones were arranged in exact anatomical position. Someone had taken this body apart and put it back together with surgical precision. I photographed everything, then checked the skeleton's pockets. Found a wallet with ID, Carl Brennan, age 44, address in Staunton. This was one of the illegal miners I was looking for. But Carl hadn't died in any mine accident. This was something else. The grinding sound started again, coming from deeper in the tunnel. I should have left right then. Should have called for backup, sealed the mine, let someone else figure out what happened to Carl Brennan. But I needed to document the full extent of the illegal operation. And I needed to know what was making that sound. 50 feet deeper, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber carved from natural cave. My lamp beam couldn't reach the far walls. The sound was louder here, echoing off stone surfaces I couldn't see. That's when I saw the copper serpent. At first I thought it was a natural mineral formation. Copper deposits can create weird shapes when they crystallize. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized what I was looking at. Someone had built a snake out of copper ore. 20 feet long, as thick as a telephone pole, coiled in the center of the chamber. The detail was incredible. Individual scales hammered from pure copper, a head the size of a car tire, eyes made from polished green malachite that seemed to glow in my lamplight. But it wasn't just sitting there like a statue. The copper serpent was moving. Not fast, not obvious. Just a slow ripple along its body, like a real snake breathing. The grinding sound was the copper scales shifting against each other as the thing moved. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, trying to process what I was seeing, trying to find a rational explanation. Some kind of mechanical device left by the miners. A trick of the light making me think metal was moving. Then the serpent's head turned toward me. The malachite eyes fixed on my position. The massive head rose from the coils, swaying slightly like a cobra preparing to strike. The grinding sound got louder as more coils shifted and moved. I ran. My lamp beam bounced wildly as I sprinted back through the tunnel. Behind me, I heard something large moving through the chamber. Not the slow grinding of metal on stone, but the fast scrape of something heavy pursuing. I made it to the entrance as something exploded out of the mine behind me, not following, just making noise, letting me know it could have caught me if it wanted to. I sat in my truck for an hour, hands shaking, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. trying to convince myself it was some kind of hallucination brought on by bad air in the mine. Carbon monoxide, natural gas, something that made me see things. But the photographs didn't lie. When I developed them later, Carl Brennan's skeleton was exactly as I remembered. Perfectly arranged bones, recent clothes, impossible precision. And in the background of one shot, just visible at the edge of my flash range, something large and metallic reflected the light. Something that definitely hadn't been there when I first entered the mine. I should have driven straight back to the ranger station and filed a report. Should have called the state police about Carl Brennan's body. Should have done a lot of things differently. Instead, I drove to the Monacan Reservation, 30 miles down the mountain. If anyone would know about copper serpents and bone arrangements, it would be the people who'd lived on this land for thousands of years before the miners arrived. The Monacan had stories about these mountains that went back further than written records. Elder Robert Monacan was sitting on his porch when I pulled up, like he'd been expecting me. He was somewhere around 70, with weathered hands and sharp eyes that seemed to look right through you. "You been up to Copper Mountain," he said before I even got out of my truck. Not a question. "How did you know? You got the smell on you. Copper and old death, plus your hands are shaking." He gestured to a chair beside his. "Sit down, Ranger man. Tell me what you saw up there." I told him everything. The bone arrangements, the seismic readings, Carl Brennan's skeleton, the copper serpent that moved like it was alive. Robert listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally like none of this surprised him. "My grandfather told stories about that mountain," he said when I finished. "Said there was a spirit that lived in the copper veins. Guardian spirit. Protector of the metal in the earth. What kind of spirit? The kind that doesn't like thieves." Robert's eyes were serious. "Copper was sacred to our people. We took some for ceremonies, for tools, but we always asked permission first. Always left offerings. Always took only what we needed. The miners in the 1800s didn't ask permission. No, they didn't." Robert stood up slowly. "Come inside. Let me show you something." His house was small but comfortable, filled with traditional crafts and old photographs. He led me to a back room lined with books and papers, tribal records, he explained, stories and maps passed down through generations. "Look at this." He pulled out a hand-drawn map of the mountain, probably 50 years old. Every X marks a place where miners died in accidents. Cave-ins, gas explosions, floods. Over 200 men killed on that mountain between 1,840 and 1,920. I studied the map. The death sites formed a pattern around the major copper veins, like a protective barrier. "Your grandfather thought the spirit was killing miners?" "My grandfather thought the spirit was protecting itself." "And the mountain?" Robert folded the map carefully. "But he also said the spirit got stronger every time someone died, fed on the bones of people who tried to steal from the earth. That's just superstition." Robert looked at me with those sharp eyes. "You saw a 20-foot snake made of copper moving around underground. You want to tell me what's superstition and what's real?" He had a point. "The spirit's been quiet for 60 years, Robert continued. "No mining, no stealing, no reason to be angry. But if someone's taking copper again, it's waking up. It's defending its territory. And it's a lot stronger now than it was in my grandfather's time. 200 years of feeding on miners' bones." I drove back up the mountain as the sun was setting, but I wasn't going back to the mine. I was going to find Carl Brennan's camp, figure out who else was involved in the illegal operation. If there were other miners working the area, they needed to be warned about what was down there. I found the camp 2 miles east of the main shaft. 3 tents, generator, mining equipment, and signs of recent activity. But no people. The tents were still set up, food in coolers, clothes laid out like the occupants had just stepped away for a few minutes. But they'd been gone for weeks. I found the second body in the equipment tent. Another perfect skeleton, this one wearing mining gear, helmet still on the skull, headlamp still attached. The bones were arranged sitting in a camp chair, hands positioned like he was holding a cup of coffee. The nameplate on his helmet read Mike Torres. The third body was arranged on a sleeping bag in one of the tents. Jenny Walsh, according to her ID. Her skeleton was positioned like she was sleeping, arms folded, head on a pillow made of her own clothes. 3 miners, all reduced to clean white bones, all arranged with impossible precision. and all killed within the last 2 months, based on the condition of their camps. As I documented the scene, the familiar grinding sound started up from the direction of the main mine, but this time it was accompanied by something new. A rhythmic rattling, like hundreds of small bones clicking together. I grabbed my seismic monitor. The readings showed massive underground movement, not random vibrations, but organized activity, like something huge was building or rearranging itself beneath the mountain. The rattling got louder. I packed up my gear and headed for the truck, but I wasn't fast enough. Something burst out of the ground 50 yards ahead of me, blocking my path to the vehicle. It wasn't the copper serpent I'd seen in the mine. This was something new, something bigger. The creature stood 20 feet tall, built from hundreds of human and animal bones wired together with copper strands. The main body was roughly humanoid, but with too many arms, all ending in skeletal hands that clicked and rattled as they moved. The head was a massive bear skull, crowned with human rib bones arranged like a crown. But the worst part was that I recognized some of the bones. Carl Brennan's skull formed part of the creature's chest. Mike Torres's arm bones made up one of its many limbs. Jenny Walsh's spine was incorporated into its neck structure. The bone creature looked at me with empty eye sockets that somehow conveyed intelligence. It tilted its head like it was studying me, deciding what to do. Then it spoke, not with a voice, but by rattling specific bones in sequence. Morse code. I'd learned it in the army 20 years earlier. Asterisk, asterisk, leave. Now, no, more, stealing. Asterisk, asterisk. The message was clear. But I had one question that needed answering. I pulled out my own flashlight and started signaling back in Morse code. Asterisk, asterisk, who are you? Asterisk, asterisk. The creature's response came faster, more complex. Asterisk, asterisk, guardian, protector. Mountain, keeper. Of, copper. Sacred. Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Why kill them? Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Thieves. Stealers. Desecrators. They took without asking. Asterisk, asterisk. I thought about Robert Monacan's words. About asking permission, leaving offerings, taking only what was needed. Asterisk, asterisk, what do you want? Asterisk, asterisk. The bone creature pointed one skeletal hand toward the mine entrance, then made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire mountainside. Asterisk, asterisk, no. More. Mining. No. More. Stealing. Mountain. Protected. Asterisk, asterisk. Then it pointed directly at me. Asterisk, asterisk, you. Choose. Leave. Or join them. Asterisk, asterisk. I looked at the perfect skeletons of Carl, Mike, and Jenny. Looked at the impossible creature built from their bones. Thought about 22 years of preventing illegal mining and protecting these mountains. Maybe there were some kinds of protection I'd never considered. I made my choice. Instead of running, I set down my equipment and approached the bone creature slowly, hands visible, no sudden movements. Like approaching a dangerous but intelligent animal. I'm not here to steal copper, I said aloud, hoping it could understand speech as well as Morse code. I'm here to stop the people who were stealing it. The creature's massive head tilted, studying me. The rattling quieted to a soft clicking as hundreds of bones shifted position. My job is to protect this mountain too, I continued. Different methods, same goal. The bone guardian considered this for a long moment. Then it began to move, flowing like liquid despite being made of solid bone and metal. It repositioned itself to one side, creating a clear path to my truck. But it also pointed toward the mine entrance. Show. You. Truth. Understanding. Necessary. I realized it wanted me to follow it underground. Every instinct screamed against going back into that mine, especially with a 20-foot skeleton monster as my guide. But I needed to understand what I was dealing with if I was going to protect these mountains properly. Lead the way. The bone guardian flowed toward the mine entrance, its many limbs carrying it across rough ground with impossible grace. I followed with my flashlight, trying to process what I was seeing. The main tunnel had changed since my earlier visit. The walls were lined with copper wire forming intricate patterns, like circuit boards or neural networks. The wire glowed with a faint green light that had nothing to do with electricity. Where does the light come from? I asked. Asterisk, asterisk, life, mountain, alive, copper, veins, blood, asterisk asterisk. We descended deeper than I'd gone before, through tunnels that hadn't existed on any mining survey. The Bone Guardian was showing me passages carved by something other than human tools, natural caves that had been modified and connected, creating a network that ran through the heart of the mountain. The central chamber was enormous. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls, but the copper wire patterns provided enough green light to show me what filled the space. Hundreds of skeletons, not arranged randomly, but built into a massive spiral pattern that covered the chamber floor. Every skeleton perfectly preserved, every bone in its proper place. And at the center of the spiral, the copper serpent I'd seen earlier, now grown to massive size. Asterisk asterisk all, who stole from mountain, all, who took without permission. Asterisk asterisk, how long has this been going on? Asterisk asterisk, since first miners came. 1847, protecting sacred copper, feeding on thieves. Asterisk asterisk. The Bone Guardian gestured toward the walls of the chamber. More copper wire patterns, but these formed recognizable shapes. Maps, showing the entire mountain's copper vein system, extending for miles underground. Asterisk, asterisk, mountain.network, connected to others. Appalachian, chain, protected by guardians. Asterisk, asterisk. I was looking at something that completely rewrote my understanding of geology and ecology. A living mountain, a conscious ecosystem that could defend itself against exploitation. What about legal mining? Proper permits? Environmental protections? Asterisk asterisk permission. Respect, offerings, take, little, leave, much, possible. Asterisk asterisk. But then the massive copper serpent in the center of the spiral raised its head. The green light from its eyes filled the chamber as it focused on something I couldn't see. Asterisk asterisk danger. New, miners, coming, big, machines, strip, mining, asterisk asterisk. The Bone Guardian's posture changed, becoming more aggressive. All its skeletal hands clenched into fists. Asterisk asterisk cannot, allow, will, protect, mountain, by any means. Asterisk asterisk. I felt vibrations through the cave floor. Not the gentle seismic activity I'd been monitoring, but something massive approaching from outside. Engines. Heavy equipment, asterisk asterisk they bring, explosives, plan, to, blast, deep, tunnels, take, everything, asterisk asterisk. Who's coming? But I already knew the answer. The illegal miners I'd found weren't independent operators. They'd been scouts for a larger operation. Someone with serious money and equipment was planning to strip mine the whole mountainside. The Bone Guardian pointed toward a tunnel that led back to the surface. Asterisk asterisk go. Now, choose. Side, mountain, or machines. Asterisk asterisk. I ran through the tunnels as the vibrations got stronger. Behind me, I could hear the Guardian mobilizing. The copper serpent was moving, and something told me it wasn't planning to hide underground this time. I reached the surface as the first truck crested the ridge road. Not one vehicle, but a whole convoy. Industrial mining equipment, explosives, transport, security vehicles. This wasn't illegal mining, this was a full corporate operation. And leading the convoy was Helen Ashby, my supervisor from the Forest Service. She got out of the lead truck with a man in an expensive suit and hard hat. Corporate mining executive, definitely. They were followed by a security team carrying weapons that had nothing to do with forest protection. Joshua, Helen called out when she saw me. Perfect timing. I want you to meet Mr. Davidson from Appalachian Extraction Corp. We're conducting a special geological survey. I looked at the heavy equipment, the explosives truck, the armed security team. This isn't a survey, Helen. This is a mining operation on protected federal land. It's a mineral rights reassessment, Davidson said smoothly. We have federal approval for exploratory extraction to determine the economic viability of copper reserves. You don't have approval from the mountain, Both of them stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Behind them, workers were already unloading drilling equipment. "Joshua, you've been up here too long," Helen said. "You're talking nonsense. Help, mister." Davidson's team accessed the mine shafts. "I can't do that. It's not a request. It's an order." The ground started to vibrate. All of us felt it. The mining workers stopped unloading equipment and looked around nervously. "Seismic activity," I said. "This area is geologically unstable. You need to evacuate immediately." Davidson laughed. "Nice try, Ranger, but we've done our own geological surveys. This mountain is solid as bedrock." The vibrations got stronger, and from the mine entrance behind me came the sound of something large moving through rock. Helen and Davidson couldn't see the mine entrance from where they stood, but I could, and I watched as the Bone Guardian emerged from underground, followed by the massive copper serpent. 22 years of protecting these mountains had led to this moment. The choice between human authority and something much older, much more powerful. I made my decision and stepped aside. "You might want to look behind me," Helen screamed first. The Bone Guardian rose to its full 20-foot height, copper wire sparking between its skeletal joints. The massive serpent coiled around it like a living crown, malachite eyes reflecting the afternoon sun. Davidson fumbled for his radio. Security team, we have a situation." The armed guards raised their weapons. "But what do you shoot at something that's already dead?" The Guardian pointed one skeletal hand toward the mining convoy, and the mountain responded. The ground beneath the heavy equipment cracked and split. Perfectly targeted seismic activity that swallowed the drilling truck and explosives transport without touching the personnel vehicles. The mountain was making a point. It could have killed everyone, but chose not to. Asterisk, warning, leave. Now, no, mining, mountain, protected. Asterisk. The Bone Guardian's Morse code rattling was loud enough for everyone to hear, but I was the only one who understood the message. "It's telling you to leave," I translated. "This is protected land." "Protected by what?" Helen demanded, her voice shaking. "By its original owners." Davidson was backing toward his truck, but trying to maintain corporate authority. "This is federal land. We have legal mining rights." The copper serpent unwound from around the Guardian and flowed across the ground toward him. Not attacking, just repositioning. Davidson found himself looking into eyes the size of dinner plates, made of pure green stone. "Legal rights don't mean much to something that's been here for thousands of years," I said. Helen grabbed my arm. "Joshua, you have to do something. You're a federal employee. This is your jurisdiction." "No," I said quietly. "This is their jurisdiction. Always has been." The mountain rumbled again, deeper this time. Warning tremors that said the Guardian's patience was running out. The security team leader made the smart choice. "Everyone back to the vehicles, now." They loaded up fast and drove away even faster, leaving nothing but tire tracks and the smoking crater where their equipment had been swallowed by the earth. I stood there with the Bone Guardian as the convoy disappeared down the mountain road. The massive copper serpent coiled around us both, not threatening, just present, watching. You understand. Now. Mountain. Alive, copper, sacred, must be protected. Asterisk. I understand, but they'll be back. With more men, more equipment, federal marshals probably. Asterisk, then. Mountain. Will respond. Stronger network of Guardians. Appalachian chain defended. Asterisk. The Guardian gestured toward the ridgeline, and I saw movement on distant peaks, other shapes, other watchers. The mountains were connected, and they were all waking up. Asterisk. You choose. Leave. Or stay. Help. Protect. Asterisk. I thought about my job, my federal pension, my normal life as a forest ranger. Then I thought about what I'd seen in the underground chamber. The network of copper veins carrying some kind of life force through the mountain chain. An ecosystem that could defend itself if it had to. If I stay, what would you need from me? Asterisk. Watch. Report. Warn. Mountain. Of. Miners. Prevent. When. Possible. Asterisk. And if I can't prevent it, the copper serpent's head rose until it was level with my eyes. The malachite depths seemed infinitely deep, infinitely old. Asterisk, asterisk, then. Mountain. Protects. Itself. Asterisk, asterisk. I spent the next 3 days writing my report. Official version for the Forest Service. Geological instability in the Copper Mountain area requires indefinite closure to all mining activity. Seismic readings indicate high probability of catastrophic landslides if underground excavation proceeds. Unofficial version for myself. I've become the liaison between the U.S. Forest Service and the oldest environmental protection agency on Earth. Helen transferred me to a desk job in Harrisonburg, probably thinking she was punishing me, but it put me in the perfect position to monitor mining permit applications throughout the region. Any company that applies for copper extraction in the Virginia mountains gets flagged, investigated, and usually finds their paperwork mysteriously delayed for years. Some operations still slip through. When they do, I file a report to the appropriate authorities. Not the Forest Service. The Bone Guardians. The mountains are waking up all through Appalachia. Strip mining operations that face impossible equipment failures. Copper veins that mysteriously disappear overnight. Drill sites that experience targeted seismic activity that somehow never threatens nearby towns. The mining companies blame environmental activists. The government blames geological anomalies. I file my reports and keep my mouth shut, because I've seen what happens when you steal from a living mountain, and I've learned that some things are more important than federal authority or corporate profits. The copper serpent visits my office sometimes, late at night, flowing through the ventilation system like liquid metal, emerging from the heating ducts to coil around my desk. Checking in, making sure I'm doing my job. Asterisk, asterisk. Mountain. Remembers. Friendship. Protection. Mutual. Beneficial. Asterisk, asterisk. Any new threats I should know about? Asterisk, asterisk, always. New. Threats. But also new. Allies. Network. Growing. Stronger. Asterisk, asterisk. I keep Carl Brennan's wallet in my desk drawer. Mike Torres's mining helmet on my bookshelf. Jenny Walsh's ID card tucked into my personal files. Reminders that some prices are too high to pay, even for copper. And every morning when I come to work, I can feel the mountain watching, patient, protective, ready to defend itself against the next group of people who think they can take whatever they want from the earth. The Bone Guardians are always listening, and they remember everything. My name is Rebecca Moonbright, and I've spent 19 years studying wild animals that hunt at night. I thought I knew everything about how wolves work together, how they talk to each other, and how they hunt. I was wrong about all of it. October 1988 was when everything I knew about predators got turned upside down. I was up on Brasstown Bald, the highest mountain in Georgia, doing my regular research on nocturnal hunting patterns. The Cherokee folks used to call this area home, and they had stories about supernatural hunters that came out during the harvest moon. I figured those were just old tales to explain away rabid wolf attacks. I should have listened to those stories. The first sign something was different came 3 weeks before the harvest moon. I was checking my electronic tracking collars, the new fancy kind with radio signals that could tell me where my study animals were at all times. 12 deer, 8 rabbits, and 3 foxes, all wearing my little electronic tags. That Tuesday morning, every single signal went dead at the exact same time. Not broken, not malfunctioning, just gone. Equipment failure, I wrote in my notebook. Check batteries and range. But when I hiked out to where the animals should have been, I found something that made my skin crawl. Every single animal had removed their collar somehow, not torn off by branches or chewed off by the animals themselves. Carefully removed, like someone with hands had unbuckled each one and set it aside in a neat pile. Animals don't do that. I radioed down to my research station. Dr. Hartwell? Lisa? You there? Static answered me back. My radio worked fine yesterday. The woods felt wrong that day. Too quiet. Not even bird sounds. In 19 years of field research, I'd never experienced a forest going completely silent like that. Even the insects had stopped buzzing. The only sound was my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I set up camp anyway. This was my job, and I'd dealt with strange animal behavior before. Bears sometimes did weird things before big storms. Maybe that was all this was. That night, I heard the howling. I've heard thousands of wolf howls over the years. Each pack has its own voice, its own rhythm. Some howl to mark territory, some to call the pack together, some to communicate over long distances. This howling was different. It had too many voices layered together, like a choir singing in perfect harmony. The sound made my teeth ache and sent shivers down my spine. But wolves don't harmonize like that. They can't. I grabbed my audio recording equipment and started taping. If this was some new pack behavior, I needed to document it. The sounds were coming from at least 6 different directions, maybe more. That meant a huge pack, bigger than anything I'd ever tracked in Georgia. Then the howling stopped. All at once. Like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I sat in my tent with my recording equipment, waiting for something to happen. My hands were shaking, though I told myself it was just the cold mountain air. That's when I heard the footsteps. Not paws, footsteps. 2 feet, walking in a steady rhythm around my campsite. Slow and deliberate, like someone taking their time to study me. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent flap just enough to peek out. The footprints in the soft dirt around my tent were huge. Bigger than any human foot I'd ever seen, but shaped wrong for a bear. They looked almost like wolf paws, but longer and with what might have been thumb marks. In the morning, I told myself I'd been tired and scared. Animal tracks could look like anything if you stared at them long enough with poor lighting. I was a scientist. I dealt in facts, not imagination. But when I packed up my equipment and started hiking back down the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me leave. Something smart enough to stay hidden, but big enough that I could feel its presence like weight on my shoulders. I had 2 weeks before the harvest moon, 2 weeks to figure out what kind of predator I was dealing with. I thought I had time to solve the mystery with careful observation and scientific method. I thought I was the one doing the studying. I came back the next week with better equipment. Night vision goggles, motion sensors, and a satellite phone that should work even in the dead zones where regular radios failed. I wasn't taking any chances this time. The changes hit me as soon as I reached the tree line. Every single tree had claw marks gouged deep into the bark, about 8 feet off the ground. Too high for normal wolves, too precise for bears. The scratches formed patterns that looked almost like writing, though not in any alphabet I recognized. My motion sensors started going crazy before I'd even finished setting up camp. Something big was moving through the forest, triggering alerts from 6 different directions at once. But when I checked my night vision equipment, I couldn't see anything. "Lisa, this is Rebecca. You getting my signal?" I spoke into the satellite phone. "Rebecca, thank God. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. 3 days? I'd only been gone since this morning." "What do you mean 3 days? I just hiked up here a few hours ago. Your truck's been sitting in the parking lot since Monday. Today's Thursday. Park rangers were about to organize a search party." I looked at my watch. Thursday, 7:30 p.m. The last thing I remembered clearly was starting my hike at dawn on what I thought was Thursday morning. Somehow, 3 days had vanished from my memory. "Lisa, I need you to contact Dr. Ravensong down in the Cherokee Nation. Ask him about the harvest moon legends, specifically about hunting spirits." "Rebecca, are you okay? You sound..." The line went dead. Not static this time. Just nothing. That's when I heard the growling, low and rumbling, like a diesel engine idling. But it was coming from directly above me. I tilted my head back and saw eyes reflecting my flashlight beam from the tree branches 30 feet up. Yellow eyes, definitely predator eyes, but far too large and too intelligent looking. The thing dropped from the tree and landed 20 feet away with barely a sound. It looked like a wolf at first glance. Dark fur, pointed ears, long snout full of teeth. But it was standing on its hind legs like a person, and it was huge. 7 feet tall at least, with shoulders broader than any human. Its front paws had fingers with claws, and when it tilted its head to study me, the expression on its face was thoughtful, curious, human-like. "Easy," I whispered, the way I'd talk to any dangerous animal. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature made a sound that might have been laughter. Then it spoke. You could not hurt us, even if you wished to. It said in a voice like gravel and wind. We have been watching you, Rebecca Moonbright. You study our kind, but you do not understand what you study. My scientific training kicked in. Document everything. Stay calm. What are you? We are what your Cherokee friends call Kanati's hounds. We hunt when the moon calls us to hunt. We take what the moon tells us to take. Its yellow eyes never blinked. The harvest moon rises in 1 week. You should not be here when it does. Are there others like you? 11 others. A full pack. The creature's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, showing teeth designed for tearing meat. We have been patient with your research. But patience has limits. I tried to stay calm, to think like a scientist. What do you hunt? Whatever provides the best chase. Deer bore us. Bears are too slow. Humans. It took a step closer. Humans are clever. Humans run in interesting patterns. Humans make satisfying prey. The temperature around me seemed to drop 20 degrees. This wasn't just some unknown species of large predator. This was something that hunted people for sport. How long have you been hunting humans? Since the Cherokee first came to these mountains, they learned to avoid us during harvest moon nights. They taught their children our patterns, our territories, our limitations. Another step closer. But their children's children forgot the lessons. And now new people come to our mountains with no knowledge of what walks here. I could see more shapes moving in the darkness around us. The creature hadn't come alone. Yellow eyes reflected my light from a dozen positions, surrounding my campsite completely. Your people used to hunt animals for food, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Why hunt humans? Humans are not food. Humans are challenge. Intelligence against intelligence. Your kind thinks itself the ultimate predator because you make tools and strategies. The creature's head tilted again, studying me like I was a fascinating specimen. But you have never been hunted by predators who also make tools and strategies. That's when I noticed the intelligence behind those yellow eyes. This wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. This was something that could think, plan, and organize complex hunts. Something that enjoyed the intellectual challenge of outwitting human prey. The harvest moon gives us our greatest power, the creature continued. For 3 nights, we become our true selves, faster than your vehicles, stronger than your weapons, smarter than your strategies. It raised one clawed hand and pointed at me. You have 7 days to leave these mountains. If you are here when the harvest moon rises, you will provide us with excellent sport. The creatures melted back into the forest as suddenly as they'd appeared, leaving me alone with my equipment and the terrible knowledge that I'd just had a conversation with something that viewed humans as entertainment. I packed my gear and hiked out that night, using my flashlight to follow the trail in complete darkness. Every shadow could have hidden one of those things, but none of them bothered me. They'd made their point. 7 days. I spent the next 5 days trying to warn people. The Park Service thought I'd suffered some kind of stress breakdown from too much isolated fieldwork. The local sheriff suggested I take a vacation and get some rest. Even my own graduate student Lisa looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Rebecca, I've worked with you for 3 years, she said during our video call. You're the most rational scientific person I know. Don't you think there might be a logical explanation for what you saw? A 7-foot-tall wolf that speaks English and organizes hunting parties? What logical explanation covers that? Stress? Exhaustion? Maybe some kind of gas leak from underground? There are caves all through those mountains. But Dr. Michael Ravensong believed me. The harvest moon hunters, he said when I finally reached him on the phone. My grandmother told me stories about them when I was young. She called them the ones who change shape when Brother Moon grows fat with power. Dr. Ravensong. I need to know everything. How do they hunt? What are their weaknesses? How did your people survive them? My people didn't fight them, Rebecca. We avoided them. During harvest moon time, no Cherokee went into the high mountains. Not alone, not in groups. We stayed in the valleys and waited for the moon to grow thin again. But there has to be something, some way to defend against them. The stories say they're bound to pack law, like regular wolves. If you can challenge the alpha and win, the others might retreat. But challenging the alpha means getting close enough to fight something that's faster, stronger, and smarter than you. What else? They're tied to the moon's power. During eclipses or cloudy nights, they're weaker, still dangerous, but not supernatural. And they have to return to pure wolf form when the sun rises. I thanked him and hung up. 2 days until the harvest moon. I had a choice. Stay away like a sensible person, or go back and try to protect the other hikers and campers who would be up there, unaware of what was hunting them. I chose to go back. Gary McKinnon was already setting up camp when I reached the base of Brasstown Bald that Friday evening. Experienced hunter, tough as leather, and completely confident that his rifle could handle any predator Georgia had to offer. Moonbright, haven't seen you in months. Heard you had some kind of wildlife encounter up there last week? Gary, you need to leave. Tonight. Don't ask questions, just pack up and get out of these mountains. He laughed. Rebecca, I've been hunting these woods for 20 years. Nothing up here I can't handle. These aren't normal wolves. Gary, all wolves are normal wolves until you put a bullet in them. Then they're dead wolves. I couldn't convince him. Gary was the kind of man who'd rather face down a charging bear than admit he might be wrong about something. I left him at his campsite and hiked higher, hoping to draw the pack's attention away from him. The harvest moon rose at 9:47 p.m., huge and orange through the autumn trees. I felt the change immediately. The air itself seemed to thicken, and every shadow looked deeper and more threatening. My battery-powered equipment started giving false readings, and my compass needle spun wildly. That's when the howling started again. But this time, it wasn't just howling. The sounds formed patterns, rhythms, almost like music. If music could be made of hunger and intelligence and the promise of violence, the harmony was perfect. 12 voices blending together in ways that hurt to hear. 3 hours later, Gary's screaming started. I ran toward his campsite, crashing through the underbrush with my flashlight beam dancing wildly ahead of me. But the screaming stopped before I could reach him, cut off like someone had flipped a switch. I found his camp destroyed, tent shredded, supplies scattered, rifle bent in half like someone had tied it in a knot. Gary was gone, but there was no blood, no body. Just massive paw prints in the dirt that shifted and changed as I watched them. The prints started as wolf paws, but as they moved away from the campsite, they gradually became more human-like, longer, with thumb marks. By the time the trail disappeared into the rocks, they looked almost like bare human feet, but with claws. Gary! I shouted into the darkness. My voice echoed back from somewhere high above, but it sounded wrong, like something else was using my voice to call back to me. The echo had an edge of laughter in it. I followed the trail as far as I could, but it vanished on the rocky slopes. My flashlight began to flicker, though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. The temperature was dropping fast, and my breath came out in white puffs. That's when I saw them. 12 shapes moving through the trees around me, staying just at the edge of my light. Sometimes they looked like enormous wolves. Sometimes they walked upright like bears. Sometimes they moved with the fluid grace of humans who were very good at hunting. Rebecca Moonbright called a familiar gravelly voice. You came back. The alpha stepped into my flashlight beam. It looked more human than it had the week before, standing fully upright with arms instead of front legs. But the wolf characteristics were still there. The pointed ears, the predator teeth, the yellow eyes that reflected light. Where's Gary? Safe. For now, we decided to keep your friend alive so you could hear him. The creature tilted its head and made a sound like a wolf whistle. Gary's voice came from somewhere in the darkness above us. Rebecca, run. They're not animals. They're something else. Your friend provided excellent sport, the alpha said conversationally. Clever, experienced, well-armed. It took all of us working together to corner him without killing him. We saved him for you to see. Let him go. We will. When the sun rises, we release all prey that survives until dawn. Old rules, sacred rules. But you. The creature smiled, showing far too many teeth. You are different prey. You study us. You try to understand us. That makes you dangerous. The pack was closing in around me, moving in perfect coordination without any visible signals between them. I counted 11 others, just like the alpha had said. Some looked more wolf-like, some more human, but all of them had that same intelligent gleam in their eyes. You have one choice, Rebecca Moonbright. Run. Give us the chase we came here for. If you can survive until sunrise, we will let you live. If not. The alpha's grin widened. Well, you understand pack law. I ran. Running through a dark forest is terrifying under normal circumstances. Running through a dark forest while being chased by 12 supernatural predators who can move faster than cars and think like humans is beyond terrifying. It's like being trapped in a nightmare where the monsters are smarter than you are. I had advantages they probably didn't expect. 19 years of studying predator behavior meant I understood pack hunting tactics. I knew they'd try to drive me toward killing zones where the terrain favored them. I knew they'd coordinate their positions to cut off escape routes. I knew they'd take turns applying pressure to tire me out before closing in for the final attack. What I hadn't expected was how much they'd enjoy it. "Excellent choice of direction, Rebecca," one of them called from somewhere above me as I scrambled down a rocky slope. "Most prey runs directly away from danger. You're thinking tactically." "She's heading for the creek bed," another voice said from my left, "trying to mask her scent trail." Clever. They were treating this like a professional consultation, offering commentary on my survival techniques while they hunted me. It was the most terrifying and insulting experience of my life. I splashed through the shallow creek, hoping the running water would interfere with their tracking, but I could hear them pacing me on both sides, matching my speed effortlessly. They weren't even breathing hard. The Cherokee taught their children to climb during harvest moon hunts. The alpha's voice drifted down from somewhere above. High places where pack coordination becomes more difficult. "Are you familiar with Cherokee survival tactics, Rebecca?" I was heading for the cliffs on the eastern face of the mountain. Steep rock faces that would force them to approach one at a time instead of as a coordinated group. But that meant climbing in the dark while exhausted, which was almost certainly a death sentence anyway. "Your heart rate is elevated," observed one of the pack members, who was keeping pace just outside my flashlight beam. "Stress hormones affecting your decision-making ability. You're beginning to panic." "Shut up," I gasped, pulling myself over a fallen log. Emotional response confirms our analysis. Panic phase beginning. I wanted to scream at them, but I needed my breath for running. The cliffs were only half a mile ahead. If I could reach them before my body gave out, I might have a chance. That's when my flashlight died. Complete darkness in the forest is different from any darkness you'll experience in civilization. No street lights, no house lights, no car headlights, just absolute black that makes you feel like you've gone blind. I stumbled to a halt, fumbling for my backup light. Technological dependence. One of them noted with what sounded like amusement. Humans rely on artificial illumination because they never developed proper night vision. "Unlike us," added another voice, "Harvest Moon provides all the light we need." I got my backup flashlight working and immediately realized they'd herded me into exactly the position they wanted. I was standing at the bottom of a natural depression, surrounded by steep slopes on 3 sides. The perfect killing ground. 12 pairs of yellow eyes reflected my light from the slopes around me. They'd stopped moving, stopped chasing. Now they were just waiting. "End of the chase. Rebecca Moonbright," the alpha said. It was standing directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the intelligence in its expression. "You provided excellent sport, better than we'd hoped. What about Gary?" "Safe, as promised. Your friend will wake up with an interesting story that no one will believe." The alpha took a step closer. "But you've seen too much, learned too much. Knowledge of our existence cannot spread. The Cherokee knew about you for centuries. They coexisted with you. The Cherokee understood boundaries. They knew which places to avoid and when to avoid them." The alpha's head tilted. "Your people have no such wisdom. They build cities wherever they please, hike whenever they please, camp wherever they please. Eventually, someone will believe your story. Scientists will come. Government hunters. Media attention." I could see its point, which was almost worse than the terror. They weren't killing me out of malice or hunger. They were killing me to protect themselves from human expansion and curiosity. There has to be another way. Perhaps. The alpha considered this. "Pack law says you can challenge for leadership. If you defeat me, the others will follow your commands. Standard wolf hierarchy. I'm not a wolf." "No, but you are an apex predator of your own species. A researcher, a strategist, someone who understands our methods." The creature's lips pulled back in that disturbing smile. "The challenge would not be combat. It would be intelligence. Outwit me, and the pack acknowledges your alpha status." I looked around at the 11 other pack members watching us. They seemed genuinely curious about what I'd decide. This wasn't just a game to them, it was their actual social structure. What kind of challenge? Escape this killing ground before the moon sets. But you may not leave the depression, and you may not use any human technology. The Alpha gestured at my backpack and equipment. Only intelligence, only strategy, only your understanding of pack behavior. And if I win, you become our Alpha. We follow your leadership, accept your territory boundaries, hunt only what you permit us to hunt. And if I lose, clean death. Quick and respectful. I looked up at the harvest moon, huge and orange above the trees. Maybe 4 hours until it set. 4 hours to figure out how to dominate a supernatural predator, using nothing but psychology and predator behavior knowledge. I accept. The Alpha's smile widened. Excellent. Your challenge begins now. The pack melted back into the shadows, leaving me alone at the bottom of the depression. But I could feel them watching, waiting to see if I was clever enough to earn their respect or if I'd just signed my own death warrant. I had 4 hours to prove that a human could outthink a shapeshifter. The key insight came to me about an hour into the challenge, when I noticed how the pack members positioned themselves around the depression. They weren't randomly distributed. They were maintaining specific territorial boundaries in relation to each other, even while they watched me. Pack hierarchy isn't just about who's strongest. It's about who understands the complex social relationships between all pack members. And if I was going to challenge for Alpha status, I needed to demonstrate that understanding. I couldn't leave the depression, but I could manipulate the pack's behavior within it. Beta female, I called up to one of the smaller pack members on the eastern slope. You're maintaining distance from the gamma male on your right. Mating season tension? The creature's ears pricked forward, surprised that I'd identified her rank and gender correctly. Delta male, I addressed another pack member. You're favoring your left rear leg. Old injury or recent damage from hunting Gary. That one shifted position slightly, confirming my guess. I spent the next 3 hours demonstrating my understanding of their pack dynamics. I identified each member's rank, their relationships to each other, their individual hunting specialties, and their positions in the pack's social structure. I showed them that I understood their communication patterns, their territorial instincts, and their decision-making processes. Most importantly, I proved that I could think like a pack leader. You've been hunting humans for sport because you're bored, I said to the Alpha as the moon began to sink toward the horizon. Deer and bears don't challenge your intelligence anymore, but hunting humans brings risks you haven't considered. The Alpha descended into the depression, moving with fluid grace. Explain. Human pack behavior is different from wolf pack behavior. When humans go missing, other humans come looking for them. In large numbers, with superior technology and coordination abilities that rival your own. I met its yellow eyes directly, the way an Alpha would. You think you're hunting individuals, but you're actually attacking a species with a pack size of 7 billion. Continue. I can teach you to hunt intelligently. Identify targets who won't be missed, locations where disappearances won't trigger large-scale search responses, timing that coincides with natural disasters or other events that provide cover. I took a step toward the Alpha. Better hunting, better sport, less risk. The Alpha studied me for a long moment. Around us, the other pack members had gone completely still. You would help us hunt your own kind more efficiently? I would help you survive in a world where humans are expanding into every habitat on Earth. You can adapt to coexist with us, or you can eventually be discovered and destroyed by us. Those are your only long-term options. The harvest moon touched the horizon. In a few minutes, it would set and the challenge period would end. Your proposal demonstrates pack leadership thinking, the Alpha said slowly. Long-term strategy over short-term satisfaction. Protection of pack interests above personal preferences. A good Alpha considers the welfare of the entire pack. Yes. The Alpha's form began to shift as the moon's power waned. It was becoming more wolf-like, less human. You have earned Alpha status, Rebecca Moonbright. We acknowledge your leadership. The other pack members howled in harmony, a sound that no longer seemed threatening. It sounded like acceptance. The moon set, and suddenly I was standing in a forest clearing, surrounded by 12 normal-looking wolves. Large wolves, but not supernaturally so. They watched me with intelligent eyes, waiting for orders. Return to your territory, I said, feeling strange about giving commands to a pack of supernatural predators. Hunt only natural prey until the next harvest moon. When that time comes, I'll meet you here and we'll discuss proper hunting protocols. The wolves melted away into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving me alone with the understanding that my life had just become very complicated. I found Gary tied up but unharmed about a quarter-mile away, with no memory of anything after his first night's sleep. His equipment was destroyed, but he was convinced a bear had wrecked his campsite while he was out hiking. I never told him what really happened. These days, I spend my time developing early warning systems for harvest moon periods and quietly discouraging hikers from visiting certain areas during specific lunar phases. I've become an unofficial guardian, protecting both humans and shapeshifters from each other. The Cherokee were right about coexistence being possible. You just have to be smarter than what you're coexisting with. And every month, when the harvest moon rises over Brasstown Bald, I remember that I'm now the alpha of the most dangerous pack in Georgia. Sometimes I wonder if that makes me the predator or the protector. Maybe there's no difference. My name is Marcus Ravencroft, and I've been a ranger in Jefferson National Forest for 20 years. Before that, I spent 3 years in Vietnam tracking Viet Cong through jungle so thick you couldn't see your own feet. I thought I knew what fear was. I thought I understood predators. I was wrong. It was December 1981, and the worst winter Virginia had seen in decades. Snow piled 8 feet deep in some places, and the temperature hadn't climbed above zero in 2 weeks. I was stationed up in the Mount Rogers high country, where the spruce trees grow so thick they block out the sun even at midday. Nearest town was Troutdale, 18 miles down a mountain road that stayed closed half the winter. Most rangers hate the isolation. Not me. After Vietnam, I needed the quiet. The mountains didn't judge you for waking up, screaming, or for jumping when a branch snapped behind you. Up here, being paranoid kept you alive. That Tuesday morning, Sheriff Dale Morningstar called on the radio. His voice crackled through the static, sounding tired. "Marcus, you there?" "Go ahead, Dale. Got another one. Farmer up on Cabin Creek Road lost 6 sheep last night. Says it wasn't no normal killing." I grabbed my notepad. This was the 4th livestock attack in 2 weeks. Same as the others? Worse. Elias Godbay's been farming these mountains for 40 years. Never seen him shook like this. I knew Elias, tough old mountain man who'd fought in Korea. If something spooked him, it was worth checking out. "I'll head up there now," I said. "Marcus, pack extra gear. Storm's coming in tonight. You might get stuck up there." The drive took an hour through snow-packed roads. Elias's farm sat in a hollow surrounded by dark spruce forest. When I pulled up, he was standing by his barn, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. "Ranger Ravencroft," he nodded. "Appreciate you coming. Show me what happened, Elias." He led me to his back pasture. What I saw made my stomach turn. 6 sheep lay scattered across the snow, but they hadn't been eaten. Their throats were torn open with surgical precision. Blood drained so completely the snow around them was bright red. The meat was untouched. "What kind of predator kills like this?" Elias asked. I knelt by the nearest carcass. The bite marks were wrong. Too big for a coyote, wrong shape for a bear. "You hear anything last night?" "That's the thing," Elias said. "Didn't hear nothing. No barking from my dogs, no bleating from the sheep, just silence. But this morning," he pointed toward the tree line. I followed his finger and saw them, tracks in the snow, leading from the forest to the sheep and back again. But these weren't normal animal tracks. They were huge, bigger than any wolf print I'd ever seen, and they walked upright. "Dog's been acting strange all week," Elias continued. "Won't go near the woods after dark. Yesterday, my old Blue wouldn't even come out of the barn." I measured the tracks with my ruler. 14 inches long, shaped like a wolf's paw, but with a heel print like a human foot. The stride was 8 feet between prints. Whatever made these tracks stood at least 7 feet tall and walked on 2 legs. "You ever heard of the Dueyo, Marcus?" Elias asked quietly. I looked up at him. "Come again?" "Old German story my grandfather used to tell. Said his people brought it from the old country when they settled these mountains. A wolf that walks like a man and thinks like the devil." "Elias, you know I don't. I know you don't believe in ghost stories. But Marcus, I've lived in these mountains my whole life. I know every predator, every track, every sound. This ain't natural. I stood up, brushing snow off my knees. The logical part of my mind said large dogs, maybe a pack of feral animals. But 20 years of tracking experience told me something different. These tracks were too purposeful, too intelligent. They showed planning. "I'm going to follow the trail," I said. "See where it leads. Don't go in them woods alone, Marcus, not with dark coming." I looked at the sky. Gray clouds were building, and the air smelled like more snow. "I'll be careful." The tracks led straight into the spruce forest, following what looked like an old deer path. But as I walked deeper into the woods, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Complete silence. In 20 years of ranger work, I'd never heard a forest this quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no sound of small animals moving through the underbrush. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The tracks continued for half a mile before they reached a small clearing. In the center was something that made me stop dead. A pile of bones, deer skulls, mostly, arranged in a perfect circle around what looked like a sleeping area. The snow was packed down in an 8-foot circle, stained dark with old blood. This was a den, or a feeding ground. But what froze my blood was what I saw at the edge of the clearing. More tracks. Fresh ones, less than an hour old, leading straight toward Elias's farm. I followed the new tracks back toward the farm, moving as quietly as my army training had taught me. The trail wound through the darkest part of the forest, where the spruce branches grew so thick they formed a tunnel of shadows. That's when I heard it, a sound like nothing I'd ever encountered. Low and rumbling, like a wolf's growl, but with an intelligence behind it that made my hair stand on end. It was the sound of something big thinking. I crouched behind a fallen log and listened. The sound came again, closer this time. Then I heard something that nearly made me run. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving through the snow. But they weren't the random wandering of an animal. They had purpose, pattern. Like a soldier on patrol, through the trees, I caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't exist. A shape moved between the trunks, massive and dark. It walked upright on 2 legs, but its posture was wrong for a human. Too hunched, too powerful through the shoulders. Its head was elongated, wolfish, and when it turned in my direction, I saw eyes that reflected the dim winter light like mirrors. For 3 seconds, we stared at each other across 40 yards of forest. Then it smiled. Not a human smile, not an animal expression. Something in between that showed too many teeth and spoke of intelligence that shouldn't exist in any predator. I reached for my radio, and the thing vanished. Not ran away, not ducked behind a tree. Vanished, like smoke, moving so fast through the dense forest that my eyes couldn't track it. I keyed my radio with shaking hands. "Dale, this is Marcus. You there?" Static. I tried again. Nothing. The storm was interfering with communications, leaving me completely alone in the woods with something that shouldn't exist. The logical thing would have been to head back to my truck and get help. But 20 years of training told me that whatever this thing was, it wasn't done hunting. Elias was still up at that farm, and if this creature wanted more livestock, or worse, he was sitting there defenseless. I made my way back to the farmhouse as fast as I could through the deep snow. Elias was inside, drinking coffee and trying to look calm. But his rifle was leaning against the kitchen table, loaded and ready. "Find anything?" he asked. "Elias, I need you to come stay in town tonight." "What did you see?" I wasn't sure how to explain what I'd seen without sounding crazy. "Something big. Something that doesn't belong in these woods. The dueño. I don't know what it was, but it's hunting, and it's not afraid of humans." Elias shook his head. "Can't leave the farm. If I run every time something threatens my livestock, I might as well sell the place. This isn't a normal predator, Elias. This thing is smart. It planned those kills last night. Then we kill it. With what? You think your hunting rifle is going to stop something that can move through dense forest without making a sound?" Before Elias could answer, his dog started barking. But it wasn't normal barking. It was the high, desperate sound animals make when they're terrified beyond reason. We both grabbed weapons and headed outside. The dogs were in their pen beside the barn, pressed against the far corner and howling at something in the tree line. Following their gaze, I saw it again. The creature stood at the edge of the forest, maybe 60 yards away. In the gray afternoon light, I could see it clearly for the first time. 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with the general shape of a wolf that had learned to walk upright. Its arms were too long, ending in hands that showed both claws and thumbs. The head was massive, with an elongated snout full of teeth and eyes that held too much intelligence. "Jesus Christ," Elias whispered. The thing tilted its head, studying us like a scientist examining insects. Then it raised one clawed hand and pointed directly at me. Not at Elias. At me. "It knows you," Elias said. The creature turned and melted back into the forest, moving with impossible grace through terrain that would challenge an experienced hiker. "That's it," I said. "We're leaving. Now." "Marcus, it's not hunting random livestock, Elias. It's hunting me, and it just told me so." We loaded what we could into my truck and headed for town as the first snowflakes of the new storm began to fall. But as we drove down the mountain road, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might hide something huge and predatory. Every sound the wind made through the branches sounded like footsteps. In my rearview mirror, I thought I saw a dark shape keeping pace with the truck, running through the forest parallel to the road at impossible speed. When we reached Troutdale, I radioed Dale again. Finally, his voice crackled through. "Been trying to reach you for 2 hours. Where are you?" "In town with Elias." "Dale, we have a problem up on Mount Rogers. Something big, something dangerous." "What kind of something?" I looked at Elias, who nodded grimly. "Something that kills for sport and thinks like a human." "Marcus, you're breaking up." "Say again?" The radio dissolved into static. The storm was getting worse, cutting off all communication with the outside world. We were trapped in Troutdale with whatever was hunting in the mountains above us, and somehow I knew it wouldn't stay in the mountains long. We spent the night at Dale's house, taking turns on watch. Around midnight during my shift, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps in the snow outside. Not human footsteps, too heavy, too deliberate. They circled the house once, slowly, like someone taking measurements. I woke Dale without making a sound, pointed toward the window. He grabbed his service weapon and crept to the front door while I covered the back. The footsteps stopped at the front porch. For 10 minutes, we waited in absolute silence. Then I heard something that nearly broke my nerve. Scratching. Slow, deliberate scratching against the front door, like someone drawing letters in the wood. When morning came, we found the marks. 4 deep gouges scored into Dale's front door, too precise to be random. They formed a clear pattern, an arrow pointing toward the mountain road. A message. "It wants you to come back," Dale said. "It's trying to separate me from help," I replied. Classic military tactic. Draw the target into terrain where you have the advantage. Military tactic? I nodded grimly. This thing doesn't just think like a human. It thinks like a soldier. That morning, Mrs. Henderson from the general store didn't open up. Dale went to check on her and found her back door torn off its hinges. Inside, the kitchen was destroyed, but Mrs. Henderson was gone. We found her tracks in the snow behind the store. Human footprints running toward the woods, and those massive predator tracks following. But the strangest thing was the spacing. Mrs. Henderson's tracks showed she was running as fast as she could, but the predator tracks showed it was just walking. It was playing with her. We followed the trail for half a mile before we found what was left of Mrs. Henderson. The creature had arranged her remains in the center of a small clearing, positioned to be visible from the trail. Another message. "It's showing off," I told Dale. "Proving it can take anyone it wants." "Then why take her instead of you?" "Because it's not ready for me yet. It's working up to the main event." That afternoon, 3 more people went missing. The Garrett family, who lived on the edge of town. We found their house empty, dinner still warm on the table, and tracks leading from their back door into the forest. This time, we followed the trail with a full posse, Dale, myself, and 6 volunteers from town. But the tracks led us in circles through the dense woods for 3 hours before we realized what was happening. We were being herded. Every time we tried to turn back, we'd find fresh tracks blocking our path. Every time we tried to take a shortcut, we'd discover barriers of fallen trees that hadn't been there the day before. "It's driving us somewhere," I told Dale. "Where?" "I don't know, but wherever it is, we're not going to like it." The tracks led us to an old mine shaft, abandoned since the 1942. At the entrance, we found what remained of the Garrett family. But they weren't just dead. They were positioned like scarecrows around the mine entrance, arranged to send a clear message to anyone who found them. "Welcome to my territory." "That's it," Dale said. "We're calling in the state police, the National Guard. Whatever it takes." "Radio's still dead from the storm," I reminded him. "We're on our own until this weather clears." Then we set up a perimeter around the town, arm everyone, establish watch posts. "Dale," I pointed to the ground around the mine shaft. "Look at the tracks." The snow around the mine was covered with those massive paw prints. But there weren't just a few sets. There were dozens. The creature had been coming here for days, maybe weeks. "This is its base," I realized. "It's been planning this whole thing." "Planning what?" Before I could answer, we heard something that made everyone in the posse freeze. Howling. But not one voice. Multiple voices, echoing from deep inside the mine shaft. "Jesus," someone whispered. "There's more than one." I listened carefully to the sound. 3 distinct voices, maybe 4. A pack. "We need to get back to town," I said. Now, we ran through the forest faster than was safe in the deep snow, but I could feel them following us. Never close enough to see, but always there. Shadows, moving between the trees, staying just outside rifle range. They were escorting us back to town like guards leading prisoners. When we reached Troutdale, I gathered everyone in the church, the only building with stone walls thick enough to stop something big and determined. "How many people are we missing?" I asked Dale. 7, counting Mrs. Henderson and the Garretts. "How many people total in Troutdale?" 1, 34, including us. I did the math. It's taken 1 out of every 5 people in town. But not randomly. It took the ones who lived alone or on the edges. It's thinning the herd. For what? For the final hunt. As if on cue, the howling started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the mountain. It was coming from the streets of Troutdale. The howling came from 3 directions: north, south, and east of the church. They had us surrounded. "Why isn't anyone watching the west side?" Dale whispered. I knew why. Because that's where they want us to run. Through the church windows, we could see shapes moving through the snow-covered streets. Huge, dark forms that walked upright but moved with predatory grace. In the dim evening light, their eyes reflected like mirrors. "How many?" someone asked. "At least 4, I said. "Maybe more." The howling stopped. In the sudden silence, we could hear them moving closer to the church. Heavy footsteps crunching through snow, circling the building like wolves around a campfire. Then one of them spoke. Not howled, spoke, in a voice like gravel grinding against stone, but with clear English words. "Marcus Ravencroft." Everyone in the church turned to stare at me. "Come out, Marcus Ravencroft, we have business." "It knows your name," Dale whispered. "Soldiers always know their primary target," I replied. "Marcus Ravencroft, you have 30 seconds. "Don't even think about it," Dale said. But I was already moving toward the door. "If I don't go out there, they'll come in here. And then everyone dies." "Marcus." "Dale, these things are hunters, smart hunters. They've been planning this for weeks. The only reason any of us are still alive is because they want me specifically." I checked my rifle and pistol, knowing neither would be much use against creatures that could move faster than anything had a right to. 15 seconds, Marcus Ravencroft. "If I don't make it," I told Dale, "get everyone to the mine shaft. That's their den, but it's also the only place you might be able to trap them." I opened the church door and stepped into the snow. 4 of them stood in the street, arranged in a loose semicircle. In the moonlight, I could see them clearly for the first time. They were magnificent and terrible, 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur that absorbed light like shadow. Their faces were wolf-like, but with human intelligence in their eyes. They stood upright like men, but carried themselves with predatory power that no human could match. The largest one, standing directly in front of me, spoke again. 20 years you have walked our mountains," it said. 20 years you have tracked our prey, interfered with our hunts. "These are human lands," I said, "protected lands." "All lands belong to the strong," it replied. "You understand this. You are a warrior. I'm a ranger. You are a killer. Vietnam taught you well. How could it know about Vietnam? How could it know anything about me? We have watched you, Marcus Ravencroft, studied your methods. You track like we track. You hunt like we hunt. You think like we think. I'm nothing like you. You killed men in Vietnam. You enjoyed it. That hit too close to home. In the jungle, tracking Viet Cong, there had been moments when the hunt became everything, when the kill was almost satisfying. That was war, I said. This is war. Your kind encroaches on our territory. Your kind breeds like rabbits and consumes like locusts. Your kind must be managed. By killing innocent people, by killing the strong first, the leaders, the protectors. Once you are gone, the rest will flee or die easily. It was right. I was the only one in Troutdale with military training, the only one who might organize an effective defense. One-on-one, the creature said, you and me. If you win, we leave these mountains for 1 year. If I win, we claim this territory completely. And if I refuse, we take this territory anyway, but everyone dies. Slowly, slowly. I looked back at the church, where 30-some people were counting on me to keep them alive. Where? The mine, where we first marked our territory, dawn. Why wait until dawn? For the first time, it showed those terrible teeth in what might have been a smile. Because the hunt is always better when the prey has time to think about it. They melted back into the shadows between the buildings, leaving me alone in the snow. When I got back to the church, Dale was waiting. Well, Dawn. One-on-one fight at the mine. Marcus, you can't. It's the only chance anyone has. If I don't show up, they'll kill everyone in town. Then we run, pack everyone into trucks and get out of here. Where? These things can run 60 miles an hour through dense forest. You think trucks on icy mountain roads can outrun them? Dale knew I was right. We were trapped. There's one other option, I said, but it's dangerous. What? The mine shaft is their den, but it's also a confined space. If I can get the leader down there, away from the others, I might be able to collapse the tunnel. That would kill you too. Maybe, but it's better odds than anyone else has. I spent the hours until dawn preparing. Cleaning my weapons, even though I knew they wouldn't be much use. Checking my gear, writing letters I hoped someone would find. But mostly, I thought about Vietnam. About tracking through jungle where every shadow might hide someone who wanted to kill you. About learning to think like a predator, to become one when necessary. Maybe the creature was right. Maybe I was more like them than I wanted to admit. When dawn came, I walked up the mountain road toward the mine, knowing I probably wouldn't walk back down. The mine shaft entrance looked different in the morning light. Less like an abandoned hole in the mountain and more like the mouth of something hungry. The creature was waiting for me. In daylight, it was even more impressive. 8.5 feet of muscle and bone, covered in fur so dark it seemed to absorb sunlight. Its eyes were yellow-green, with an intelligence that was completely unnatural. You came, it said. I gave my word. Yes, warriors understand honor. It had chosen the location carefully. The area around the mine entrance was clear of trees, giving it room to maneuver. But it also put the mine shaft entrance directly behind it. If I could somehow drive it backward, your weapons will not help you, it said, noticing my rifle and pistol. Our kind has survived human weapons for centuries. Then why the formal challenge? Why not just kill me? Because you are not prey. You are competition. Competition must be defeated properly, or it returns stronger. The creature began to circle, and I found myself moving to match its movements. Like two gunfighters in an old western, looking for the right moment. Tell me about your pack, I said, hoping to distract it. My children, raised to reclaim these mountains from your kind. How many? Enough. It lunged without warning, moving faster than anything that large should be able to move. I dove sideways, rolling in the snow, and came up firing. My bullets hit center mass, but they might as well have been mosquito bites. The creature paused, looked down at the holes in its chest, and laughed. Your turn, it said. The backhand caught me across the chest and sent me flying 10 feet through the air. I hit the ground hard, feeling ribs crack, but I was alive. It was playing with me. I scrambled backward toward the mine entrance, and it followed, taking its time. In Vietnam? How many men did you kill? Why does it matter? Because killing changes you, makes you understand what you truly are. It was right. In the jungle, I had discovered something dark about myself. A part that enjoyed the hunt, the stalking, the moment of victory over an enemy. I killed them to protect my men, I said. You killed them because you are a predator, like us. Another swipe of its claws, and this time I wasn't fast enough. 3 parallel cuts opened across my back, deep enough to show bone. I was losing blood, losing strength, but I was also getting closer to the mine entrance. "Join us," it said. "Your kind is weak, but you have potential. My kind doesn't kill innocents. Your kind destroys everything it touches. We kill cleanly, for survival. You kill slowly, for profit." I couldn't argue with that. Humans had done more damage to these mountains than any predator ever could. But that didn't make this thing right. The creature grabbed me by the throat and lifted me off the ground. Its claws began to tighten, cutting off my air supply. "Any last words, Marcus Ravencroft?" With the last of my strength, I pulled the pins on both grenades I'd taken from my emergency kit. "Yeah. Fire in the hole." The creature's eyes widened as it saw the grenades. It threw me away from itself, turning to run, but it was too late. The explosion was tremendous in the confined space of the mine entrance. The creature screamed, a sound like a steam engine mixed with a dying animal, as the blast threw it backward into the mine shaft. Rock and debris rained down as the shaft began to collapse. I crawled away from the entrance as fast as my injuries would allow, feeling the mountain shake as tons of stone sealed the mine forever. When the dust settled, I was alone, but I could hear howling in the distance. The pack, mourning their leader, or maybe calling for revenge. I made it back to Troutdale just as Dale and a rescue team were heading up the mountain to look for me. "Jesus, Marcus, what happened?" "Cave-in at the mine," I said. "Natural gas explosion, maybe." The whole thing came down. It was the story we agreed on. The official report blamed the missing people on a late-season avalanche that also caused the mine collapse. Case closed. But I know the truth. I killed their leader, but the pack is still out there. Every winter, when the snow gets deep and the temperatures drop below zero, I hear them howling in the high country. They're waiting. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, I find myself standing at my window, looking up toward Mount Rogers, and wondering what it would be like to run with them through the dark forest. Because the creature was right about one thing. Killing does change you, and maybe I'm more like them than I want to admit.